Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I'm glad that you can join me on this episode. It is an early Monday morning back in the States. It is a bit late here, but all things being equal, I hope you guys are doing all right. 70K. We have hit 70K. This channel has finally, in fact, I think we're more than 70K at this point. I think it's 70,300. But couldn't get here without you. I deeply appreciate you guys joining me in order to hit this particular number. And we are going to continue to move until we hit 80K, 90K, and 100K. Hopefully, I still exist at the point where basically I want to hit 100K before I drop dead. That's my goal. That's my objective. If it's greater than that, fantastic. But at the very least, I want to hit 100K before I drop dead. This is kind of like the chess thing. I wanted to hit 2,000 before I drop dead. Hit 2032, mission accomplished. I want 100K on this one also. Daniela, congratulations. Well, thank you for that. Ren Hazelton, congratulate. Well, thank you for that. As long as the war keeps going, it can only go up. Yeah, I suppose that's grim, though, right? It's kind of grim. But yeah, let's see, U.S. Navy debt. Hey, Abdul Malik, how Thomas and Trump doing? LMBO. I don't know what LMBO means. Deborah Wilson, Adric, Hi Pi, Grand Rising. Yeah, shout out to everybody. Interesting news. But I think people may be getting this news slightly wrong. So, and I guess there are a few things. One, the Moldovan elections that were rigorously cheated all the way through. And when I say rigorously cheated, I mean rigorously cheated. You had two parties that were supposed to be pro-Russian that were eliminated days before the election. You had threats that if the parliament went a different way, that the election would be annulled. You had Transnistria blocked from getting to the election site, with the exception of going in like the last 30 minutes, something to that effect. You had Russia giving 2 polling locations for all of Russia, whereas Europe, Ireland by itself got like 20 or something to that number, like meaning had more than 10. Tiny Ireland as comparison to the entirety of Russia, only getting 2. You had grotesque propaganda put out saying that the Russians are invading, the Russians are spending all of this money into the election. And so we have to get further involved. You only allow election observers that you want on the ground for the election, meaning systemically, all the way through, they did everything in their power to cheat in that election. It was, I would say astonishing, but we saw what happened to Romania. And in the Romania sense, they did the same thing, right? I would argue, though, that this was worse than Romania. In the Romania one, they got rid of Carlin Gogetscu. He was the main candidate. Carlin Gogetscu won the first round, and then they annulled the election when it was clear he was going to win the second round election. This is something that Europe seems to be doing more and more in order to retain some level of power in Europe. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. Don't pretend Europe is a democratic system. It is not. It is something else. The other thing that popped up just before I started on the show is, well, I'll play the clip, but, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think Kellogg is, I think they are attributing words to Kellogg that has a lot of couching in it. I'll say it that way. This is Kellogg. Listen to what he says here.
But he's asked, I know that President Zelensky did in fact ask for that.
Are you, I just want to clarify, are you saying though that it is the president's position that Ukraine can conduct long-range strikes into Russia, that has been authorized by the president?
I think reading what he has said and reading what Vice President Vance has said, as well as Secretary Rubio, the answer is yes. Use the ability to hit deep. There are no such things as sanctuaries. That's one of the reasons I believe that this last week, and it has been confirmed, that President Zelensky asked President Trump to get Tomahawk missiles, which give you a depth. They're really good systems. America makes the best systems in the world.
Are we giving him the Tomahawks?
Well, that decision has not been made.
All right, let's play that back. Trump hasn't said this, by the way. Trump hasn't said this. And listen to the Weasley words Kellogg uses when he's answering this. Kellogg is given his point of view. Kellogg is not given policy.
I just want to clarify. Are you saying, though, that it is the president's position that Ukraine can conduct long-range strikes into Russia, that has been authorized by the president?
I think reading what he has said and reading what Vice President Vance has said, as well as Secretary Rubio.
Reading what he said and reading what Rubio said.
The answer is yes. Use the ability to hit deep. There are no such things as sanctuary.
Well, why do you have to read what he said? Right? If Trump gave that order, gave that command, and allowed that policy, then he would just say, yes. Reading what he said, reading what the president said, it's like, so you're not in on it. You're reading news like everybody else is reading the news.
Clarify. Are you saying, though, that it is the president's position that Ukraine can conduct long-range strikes into Russia, that has been authorized by the president?
I think reading what he has said.
I think reading what he has said
and reading what Vice President Vance has said
and reading what Vice President Vance has said. Now, keep in mind, all of this started with I think.
As well as Secretary Rubio. The answer is yes. Use the ability to hit deep. There are no such things as sanctuary.
That's the most non-committal yes that I've ever heard in my life. People are running with this saying Donald Trump has authorized long-range strikes into Russia. Kellogg starting this with an I think. That is not indicative of Donald Trump authorizing anything. That's bizarre. That's bizarre. I don't quite get that. Like, they're making the argument that Trump has changed policy. Now, the Wall Street Journal pointed out that no policy shift has been made. And as I pointed out with the tweet that came out that Donald Trump put out that they're effectively basing this off, Donald Trump used a tactical tweet and people took it as a change of policy. When he points out, hey, I think Ukraine can take all of their territory back. I think Europe paying them and giving them money is enough for them to take their territory back. Russia's a paper tiger. Russia's looking bad. Russia's blah, 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 blah. But what's the key point there? A, everybody knows that's not true. Zelensky himself acknowledges that's not true, right? So he is distancing himself from this, saying, I think with Europe's help, not us, Europe's help, that they can take all of their territory back. I think they maybe even take more of their territory back. Okay, this is patently absurd. This is patently absurd. And so you have to wonder, okay, well, why is Donald Trump saying this? A, he's saying this to distance himself from this situation. Effectively, we don't have anything to do with this. This is Europe. This is NATO, despite the fact that the U.S. pays 16% of NATO and is NATO. But whatever. This is on Europe. Here's your bag. Run with it. And then to get to the very end, it says, well, I want to wish all of you well. We will continue to supply weapons. I'm out. Now, Zelensky did ask Trump for long-range strikes. From my understanding, Trump never told him yes on that. In fact, the Wall Street Journal points out that he never got a yes on that. And even in this one, he's like, Tomahawk missiles. Again, Kellogg is like, yeah, I don't know if that choice has been made yet. I don't know if that choice has been made yet. Also, understand the idea that Ukraine is firing those long-range missiles is nonsense. That is a European project, and Russia has already pointed out we will respond in kind. So there's that. I think people are boosting this clip as hyperbolic, whereas the reality of it is Kellogg is giving his opinion of policy, not actual policy. And I think it's indicative of the I think. In my mind, I think this. Okay, Kellogg, can you point to a tweet or something that the president said that he's authorized long-range strikes? You cannot. If anything, I think Trump said he may or something to that effect. But again, be careful what you wish for, because there will be a response to those long-range strikes where you are going to end up in a third world war. Be careful and be aware. I have to be honest with you, though. I think that fix is already in. Donald Trump seems to be wavering on his want to be in this particular war. Donald Trump seems to want to hand this bag off to Europe and say, hey, Europe, you deal with this. I don't want to be directly involved like a Joe Biden was directly involved. I want to, give advice, maybe intelligence, definitely sell you weapons, but I want to kind of extricate myself from this. Europe freaks out, and in Europe freaking out, believing that daddy is about to leave, or at the very least, daddy is not being sufficiently attentive, started coming up with all of these false flags. Estonian airspace. There's a bomb that falls into Poland. There's drones that go into Poland. Oh my God, there's drones over Denmark. There's drones over this. There's drones over that. These are obviously the Russians. Meaning the hysteria started to kick up the moment that it became, at the very least, seemingly clear that Donald Trump was less engaged than they wanted him to be. That's not a coincidence. We believe daddy is going to go get milk and daddy is not coming back. And so we're doing everything in our power to keep daddy back home. And even then, the positions that Donald Trump is effectively leaving, especially like the Baltic states, well, that is a choice that the president is making on some level. NATO is occupying those spaces. So, yeah, I haven't seen anything where Trump made that choice. I suppose when Trump's make that choice, he'll tweet it out or put it on Truth Social, ironically named. Kellogg is not the guy to make that decision. And running with the idea that Trump is doing X because Kellogg says he thinks Trump is doing X is nonsense. Just nonsense. Nonsense on his face. But people will run with it. People will run with it. And they would scream loudly that Donald Trump has changed policy. And up to this point, I have seen no such thing. Maybe he will. And certainly Europe wants him to get more ensconced into the conflict, more ensconced into the war. But up to this point, not so much. Apparently, Zelensky went to Trump saying, hey, I have an idea for another offensive, which Trump referenced when he was apparently having a conversation. And I suspect has something to do with this idea that I think Ukraine can take back more of their territory. Does he really believe that? We honestly really believe that? I would be stunned. But it is Trump, so maybe not. The last person he talks to in the room is what he's effectively going to come up with. I want to go to my guess. I hear my guess. The man himself, Kit Clarenberg. How you doing, Kit? You doing okay this morning?
Yeah, very well, thanks, Jamal. Yourself?
I'm doing all right. Well, this afternoon for you. You're not in the States. And no. For the audience, Kit Clarenberg, he's an investigative journalist documenting the role of intelligence services in shaping politics perception. You can find Kit's work at Global Delinquents, the Gray Zone UK, and a couple of weeks ago, you even had one in the Gray Zone proper. Thank you for joining me, man. I really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure.
You wrote an article that I have been hearing stuff bubble up, even going to Joe Rogan pointing stuff out about the anomalies associated with the Kit Clarenberg murder. Not Kit Clarenberg, Jesus Christ. The Charlie Kirk murder.
Do you know something I don't?
No, right? You know it's wild, right? You're going to get a bunch of like conspiracy. If anything happens, they're going to be like, Jamal knew. How did Jamal know?
Yeah. Foreknowledge. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, foreknowledge. He just knew. No, the Charlie Kirk's murder and all of the mysteries surrounding that murder and the weirdness associated with it. I mean, we already knew about, I got to be honest, what I find to be a forged confession document of text messages that they were using. That part was already known. But there were other anomalies associated with the shooting itself, anomalies with the movements of the person, the activities of the people immediately after the killing, all of this stuff. And just so the audience can see for themselves, this is your article on this. And some of the other videos that have came out also look a little strange. Like the idea that his body is so superhuman that it is stopping a sniper rifle that could cut through a moose. And they're like, yeah, but his bone density. He's like Superman. And it's like, okay.
Well, I mean, it's that's the thing is that's not even the stupidest part. like of the story. I mean, it's really quite extraordinary. And I must say as well, I think that it's very disappointing to see an almost total lack of interest in the ever multiplying anomalies and oddities and grave questions surrounding this. You know, like it is primarily people on the right who are bringing this up, with the notable exception of my friend Ricky Hale, Council of State Media, who's done some really fantastic forensic digging on these issues. It's not really of any kind of concern to people on the left, and it really should be, because we are seeing Charlie Kirk's murder, or was it, being exploited for political gain by the Republicans to justify completely draconian crackdowns on dissent. There's been talk of banning Antifa. I'm not sure how you would go about doing that, given this rather sprawling, leaderless entity, which, you know, has kind of varying chapters of varying size and influence throughout the country. I'm not sure, how you would ban them, but also calls for laws to revoke the citizenship and passports of people who are critical of Israel, and all sorts of other just completely insane measures. And Charlie Kirk is being exploited explicitly for these purposes. Now, I might add as well that I myself was motivated to write this because there is just nothing about this incident, let alone the official narrative or narratives, there are several now, make any logical sense whatsoever. It's to an extent that's really quite extraordinary. For instance, in the immediate aftermath of Charlie Kirk's execution, the FBI was very quick to claim that they had an open and shut case against this individual called Tyler Robinson. He's a 22-year-old college dropout, allegedly terminally online, although he doesn't have very much of a visible online footprint, it must be said. I mean, whether that's as a result of a cleanup operation having been conducted by social media platforms, or it's just a lie that he was, was a Zoomer, it isn't particularly clear. He was allegedly radicalized in, like left-wing politics. How terrifying. And seized the opportunity of Charlie Kirk's appearance at Utah Valley University to assassinate him. Now, the scenario posited by authorities as to how Robinson allegedly killed Kirk makes absolutely zero sense whatsoever. So they would have us believe, or would have had us believe, that Robinson, the day before Kirk's appearance at UVU, drove to some woods near the university, dropped the gun off in advance in a cardboard box, drives back home. The next day, he drives to UVU, goes to the woods on foot to collect the rifle, carrying it in a rucksack, which doesn't look like it was big enough to carry the gun in the first place. He then enters the building, the campus building from where Kirk is allegedly shot, wearing one set of clothes. He then changes clothes before setting up a sniper's nest, assembling the gun, calibrating its sights, taking the shot that killed Kirk, allegedly. He then jumps off the roof, changes back into the clothes he was wearing when he entered the building, goes back into the woods to drop off the gun in a cardboard box, wrapped in a towel, and then dawdles around the UVU campus for hours afterwards. I mean, this is despite having the ability to immediately flee the scene in a car. Right. I mean, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Now, you mentioned the text messages, which have been offered as evidence of his guilt. They have been subject to much skepticism and outright mockery online, because there are no timestamps, which is pretty standard when text messages or emails are cited in indictments and charging documents, but also they contain all sorts of passages that just seem very bizarre for a assassin keen to cover their tracks, and B, a 22-year-old left-winger to say. So he starts off by telling his roommate and lover, this is Robinson now, I had hoped to keep the secret till I died of old age, before offering all of this hyper-incriminating extraneous detail about clothing changes and where he planted the gun and how he was worried the police would find it, and references to serial numbers and fingerprints and blah, blah, blah. And then he also, Robinson, allegedly deploys phrases like drop point and squad car. I mean, do you know any 22-year-olds who use such phraseology? I mean, I've seen some people suggest that that this was written by AI. I myself, remain. I don't rule out the possibility that a drunken Kash Patel just cooked this up, late at night, just because reasons, or something equally ludicrous. Now, what's interesting is that since this initial kind of wave of kind of concrete identification of Tyler Robinson as the the lone nut shooter in the vein of Lee Harvey Oswald, and there are other parallels and echoes of JFK's assassination in Charlie Kirk's, which we'll get into. Kash Patel has since then, during Charlie Kirk's very bizarre memorial service, which was obviously very public, had this huge crowd, and his wife gave this quite strange speech during which she was giggling at points, and her body language seemed very odd. Kash Patel, while this was happening, issued a statement saying, we're investigating theories, including the location from where the shot was taken, whether there was more than one shooter or Robinson had accomplices. We are investigating whether the text message confession is actually legit. So already authorities seem to be rowing back on the official narrative of what happened. Now, that in itself is a very bizarre turnaround within just, it's 2.5 weeks or just over since this happened, and we've had so much discrepant information. In the intervening time, a wide variety of deeply suspicious video footage has emerged from the event. Now, I referenced this in my piece, and it's by no means the only deeply suspicious footage to emerge. There's a smartphone video that's shot in the immediate aftermath of Kirk shooting, and it shows that the central campus area where he was talking is basically empty, that the crowd had fully dispersed. There's zero visible police presence whatsoever, or any indication that law enforcement or TPUSA security were trying to isolate the scene to prevent evidence being contaminated or degraded or tampered with. The reverse, in fact. In this clip, an individual wearing sunglasses can be seen standing Kirk's upended, blood-spattered chair upright, then using it as a makeshift step ladder or stool to remove a camera that was situated behind where Kirk was sitting. He then steps away, removes the camera memory card, hands it to someone else who stuffs it in their cap and walks off. He then removes the memory card from a camera directly facing Kirk, which is, this is very unambiguous evidence of evidence tampering, which is a very serious crime. There's no indication that this individual is wanted for questioning, let alone is a suspect in any criminal investigation. Why it was considered a priority for TPUSA to seize and spirit away this potentially vital evidence isn't remotely clear. Now, one interpretation or one solution to this riddle could be that these cameras might have revealed the direction from which Kirk was actually shot, because Tyler Robinson was allegedly on a roof facing where Kirk was sat. Now, the footage of Robinson running away has been broadcast widely in the mainstream media. It was shot by a camera trained directly on the roof from where Kirk was allegedly shot. But, the far more incriminating images of Robinson, setting up his sniper's nest and shooting Kirk haven't been released. Which is, to say the least, very odd. But even more suspiciously, the horrible footage of Kirk's neck, a hole appearing in his neck and then blood spurting from it. It looks much more like an exit wound rather than an entry wound, which would strongly suggest that he was actually shot from behind. But if he was shot from the front and that gory spurt was an entry wound, there should have been this massive eruption of blood and shrapnel and bone behind him from an even bigger exit wound. And you mentioned that the type of ammunition he was allegedly shot with, it was like 30-06. This is used for like killing elks and moose. I've seen videos of people shooting watermelons with it, and they basically just evaporate. Kind of blink and you'll miss it because such is there. But as you mentioned, there was a TPUSA spokesperson called Andrew Colvert who attempted to offer an explanation for this kind of glaring evidentiary issue, and he claims that a surgeon who tended to Kirk told him the bullet absolutely should have gone through, but in a medically unprecedented miracle, Kirk's body stopped it, and the bullet was found just beneath his skin. And yes, Colvert said this was because Charlie Kirk's bone density was so healthy and impressive that he's like the man of steel. I've just seen a flying pig. But there's another point to be made here as well, which is there is something that perked my suspicions and got my antenna twitching in the immediate aftermath of Kirk getting shot. And is the fact that this generated blanket media coverage, not just in the US, but the world over. I have comrades throughout Europe, in Australia, New Zealand, other parts of the world, who in many cases themselves had never heard of Charlie Kirk before his assassination, who've told me that their national media is drowning in stories about Charlie and his killing. Which they thought was very odd for someone who was a minor, if not non-existent figure in their kind of local milieu, as it were, politically or otherwise. But the point is despite all of this blanket coverage and the European Parliament standing in silence for a minute in honor of the great Charlie Kirk, I mean maybe they'll be chiseling his face into Mount Rushmore next. There is so many basic details are unforthcoming. There's been no official announcement from the hospital where he was taken to about his cause of death, when he died. We don't even know which hospital he was allegedly taken to. He was bundled into an SUV by his supporters and driven away. There's been no formal funeral for him, as far as I'm aware, unless his seemingly publicity-hungry wife and supporters had a very small, low-key secret ceremony somewhere without telling anyone, which seems quite unlikely. We haven't had a ballistics report. We haven't had an autopsy report. So many basic details that you would expect to emerge in the immediate aftermath of someone getting killed like this, they're unforthcoming, which is very, very odd.
Correct me if I'm wrong. There was no autopsy in this, even though it was a murder.
Yeah, well, I mean, I mean, allegedly there was a coroner told Colvert about this medical miracle, which implies that his body was looked at. But yeah, it's just very, very weird. This is very weird. I might add that during Erica Kirk's address, she said she specifically, while giggling, talked about how she had seen Charlie's body at a Utah hospital, not revealing which hospital it was. So it's like, yeah, there's all, I've seen some people even question whether he got killed. I mean, it very much looks like he got shot in a manner which would, kill anyone irrespective of their bone density. But it's like, you can kind of understand where that suspicion comes from, because all of these basic details which accompany the death of anyone, let alone a kind of high profile figure in the US like Charlie Kirk, are they're just absent from any consideration whatsoever. Which is very strict. Now, there's another video anomaly which I didn't go into in my piece, but I do think it's worth mentioning, is that there is a clip of the reaction of members of TPUSA who were seated near the tent where Kirk was speaking. Instantly after Kirk gets shot, they rush to the table he was sitting at. Now, there is some suggestion that they were trying to seize particular items, and there were handovers or people pocketing things. The video looks too grainy for me to make any, and imprecise for me to make any, concrete conclusion about what they were or weren't doing. But leaving aside any consideration of that, in a shooting scenario like this, in the open air, I struggle to see how your instant reflexive reaction is to run to where he was shot, because you wouldn't know what direction he was shot from or whether there was more fire coming, which does tend to suggest that they knew there wasn't going to be any further shots and that they were safe. It's like they're not ducking and covering. They're not trying to get other people to safety. They're rushing directly to where someone's just been killed within a split second of it happening. And it seems like a very, very, very strange thing indeed for anyone, let alone people, who worked with and for Charlie, including his security detail, to do. Now, there's another. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I'm sorry to interrupt you. They could have been rendering aid. Like, for example, let's say if I had a family member, the family member gets shot. My first response is not going to duck and cover. My first response is going to run to see if the person is okay and to try to render aid, right?
Yeah, but that's not what they do. Like, they literally run to the table and seemingly, stand there, not tending to Charlie, but swiping things from the scene. So it's like, I totally get what you're saying, but it's like, there's no attempt to protect themselves. There's no attempt to protect anyone else, and they don't even seem particularly concerned about Charlie's welfare, which is very strange. And I might add that the mainstream media has even commented on the shocking rank security failures on the day. So Charlie Kirk's events typically were very heavily policed. So to give you an example, in his penultimate rally in California, is this place I'd not heard of before, I must admit, called Visalia. It was held indoors, and there were 60 officers deployed for a crowd of 2,000 people. There were very clear restrictions in place on what attendees could have in their possession. Like people couldn't bring signs in. And there were bag checks. There was a very clear and heavy police presence in the crowd to make sure nothing went wrong. In the days leading up to the event, local law enforcement conducted wide-ranging reconnaissance, scouting out spots of interest to potential shooters, identifying local residents who might have ill will towards Charlie, to monitor them in advance. And on the day itself, you had a large police presence, including drones, outside the venue, monitoring his arrival and departure. Whereas by contrast, this open air event, which in an Associated Press report, there are US Secret Service veterans who express kind of complete shock and disbelief that this would be held in such an open environment. The attendees have testified that there were no entry gates for the event. Their tickets weren't checked, their bags weren't searched. There was no indication that they could see that nearby rooftops or buildings were being monitored or were locked down, you know, in the event of suspicious activity. UVU claims that the event being held outdoors was specifically requested by TPUSA representatives. Even then, you know, they deployed just 6 campus police officers to oversee an event which attracted around 3,000 people. Wow. You know, there's more security at a rock concert. You know, like it's just completely wild to me, and it's like it very interestingly. For many years, TPUSA's protection detail was run by the Schaffer group. This was founded by Greg Schaffer, who's the US military veteran. A lot of its staff have backgrounds in intelligence, including Israeli intelligence. Greg Schaffer himself is tied to JINSA, the Jewish Institute for National Security in America, which is the driving force behind the Israeli occupation forces training US police forces. It advocates for greater integration between the US and Israeli military intelligence and security apparatuses. It's even advocated for the US setting up a dedicated military base in Israel itself, which is, you know, very controversial and would not be received very well in many quarters. You know, and it's like he commented and said, well, it's shocking that there was no consideration given to the threat of sniper fire, given the 2017 Las Vegas massacre, which, you know, serious questions hang over what happened there too. But he kind of suggested that, well, maybe Kirk's security people were focused on threats coming from a much closer distance. And Schaffer said that the main threat had always been, when he was in running Turning Point USA security, was somebody getting in the inner circle and attacking Charlie, quote unquote. And I wonder if those remarks are more illuminating than he intended, because somebody certainly could have infiltrated Charlie's inner circle and explicitly cleared the path for him to be shot.
Interesting. It's weird. You also point something else out. It is very bizarre for somebody to get shot, and the response of the team is, let's put a chair up in the middle of blood. Let's pull all of the cameras and let's, you know, skedaddle or whatever. That's very strange. You would think that you would just let the police process the crime scene. They would go to the crime scene. They would take the video footage. They would look at the video footage. Now, chain of custody is very weird in all of this, now that they've effectively taken videos. Like, what? I don't know. It's a very odd thing where they felt in that moment, we need to get the video footage now. What the hell is that? I mean, that's very bizarre to me. And as you point out, this has been used as a political cudgel, as a political weapon. And, you know, it's like when you have J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, Tulsi Gabbard, Tucker Carlson at a funeral or a memorial service, I guess if they want to call it that, it is obviously being used as a political weapon. Even the whole Antifa stuff, it is being used as a political weapon. So it's almost like in the very beginning, they started figuring out how can we manipulate this and take advantage of this particular situation to our end. Oh, right. There's a transgender person that Tyler is associated with. Let's call him the lover. Let's put out text messages that seem to be very dodgy, that the public don't necessarily agree with. Like, all of this has been very strange. We'll see how this shakes out in court. Has Tyler given any comments on this himself?
Well, no. So, I mean, this is another interesting aspect as well, which is that effectively Tyler voluntarily turned himself into the police because the images that were circulating of someone wanted in connection with the shooting resembled him, or at least they were wearing clothes that he was known to wear. But he has denied any involvement, and he said that he turned himself in voluntarily because he didn't excuse me, I've got to stop smoking. Yeah, no, sorry. They're so cheap in the Balkans, I can't help it. But the point is that that he said that he was worried about a SWAT team raid on his home, which might have killed him or his family. He has appeared in court, I think, one time via video link. Didn't really say anything apart from confirm his name. But again, it's like he's been rather forgotten after this initial burst of like mainstream profiles of who was Tyler Robinson and why did he shoot Charlie Kirk. He's kind of disappeared from the picture somewhat, and I think that there are obvious questions. I mean, which even the FBI seems to be acknowledging by saying that there could have been other shooters or accomplices. That he may have been a patsy of some kind, because here, as I mentioned, his behaviour is certainly not what you would expect an assassin to do. I might add I might add as well that those texts which seemingly highly incriminate him, they just seem a bit too obvious. It's like, all right, so I wanted to take this secret to the grave, but now I'm going to tell you about everything in minute detail that I did, including where I changed clothes and where I left the rifle and how I'm worried the police will find it and blah blah. And it's just like, I made this joke on Twitter and I will repeat it. It's like a really, really bad JFK assassination tribute act. I mean, yes, we've got a magic bullet. There was allegedly a confession note that Tyler Robinson wrote, which has not been produced publicly. Kash Patel, in this very bizarre interview, I believe it was to Fox, said the note got destroyed. He didn't specify by whom or how, but he claimed that unspecified forensic evidence proves the note did exist and that it openly stated, I decided to kill Charlie Kirk, despite the fact that Tyler Robinson allegedly also wanted to keep it secret until he died. It's just ludicrous. And I think another point that I get into in my article, and it's certainly worthy of further investigation, is we at the Grey Zone, we have in the weeks following Charlie's assassination, we have spoken to a wide variety of his close associates, many of whom are absolutely terrified, it must be stressed, and quite understandably either didn't want to talk to us at all or would only talk to us under the strictest anonymity, and so what very quickly emerged from speaking to them was that in the last kind of weeks of his life, Charlie was extremely worried about having pissed off the Israeli lobby. Now, It must be stressed that Charlie was an ardent Zionist for most of his time in the public eye. And a unapologetic one, but in over the summer, this past summer, he seemed to change course slightly. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting that he was possessed of any sympathy whatsoever for the Palestinians or Muslims more generally, but he did publicly express concern over the level of Tel Aviv's influence over US politicians. He openly and also apparently privately to Donald Trump's face said that he was extremely worried about the threat of Benjamin Netanyahu dragging the US into war with Iran. In July, there was a Turning Point USA conference which featured speakers like the anti-Zionist Jewish comic Dave Smith, who gave a speech about a very critical speech about the Gaza genocide. The somewhat unhinged Megyn Kelly talking about whether Epstein was related to Mossad. Some of the sources that we spoke to, they told the Grey Zone that that after this summit, numerous wealthy allies of Netanyahu in the US started to bombard Charlie with threatening phone calls and text messages demanding that he correct course, as it were, and stop his very mild criticisms of stop issuing mild criticism of Israel and never again platform anti-Zionist voices. He publicly, Charlie publicly talked about how he was under intense pressure and that he wasn't happy about it in an August 6th interview. Weeks before his assassination, hardline Zionist billionaire Robert Shillman, who was like one of the initial funders of Turning Point USA, ended his financing of the organization. And I might add as well, in a very interesting chain of events, we reported on a hitherto unknown influencer retreat in the Hamptons that was organized by billionaire Bill Ackman, who is yet another hardcore Zionist money man. Now, the initial and we noted in this report that the event was ostensibly about the threat of Mamdani becoming New York mayor and therefore precipitating the collapse of Western civilization. But allegedly, it descended into a series of personal attacks on Charlie Kirk specifically for his criticism of Israel. Ackman led the charge with this kind of dossier of offences he committed against Tel Aviv, and this deranged woman called Natasha Horsdorf, who's the public face of UK Lawyers for Israel, which is this deranged Zionist lobby group, which is currently under investigation by the UK Charity Commission and Solicitors Regulation Authority, because they pretend to be a charity and pretend to be a legal body when they're neither, and engage in activities which are, dubious to say the least. And they try and neutralize displays of Palestinian solidarity in workplaces and schools and hospitals and, every sphere of public and private life. Anyway, initially, the response from a lot of people was, well, this report is based entirely on anonymous sourcing. It's total bullshit. I might add that the Grey Zone almost never, ever bases its reporting on anonymous human sources, and the mainstream media does this all the time, like daily. So clearly we're held to a higher standard than the Washington Post is. But I digress. The point is that actually, after this flurry of allegations of disinformation and fake news, a large number of influencers who had attended this Hamptons retreat confirmed it did happen, but they said, well, they kind of issued this non-denial denial, stating, well, if Charlie was barraged over Israel, we didn't see it, which is not particularly convincing. And there was one influencer who specifically claimed, I was evasive when Max Blumenthal spoke to me on the phone because I was wine drunk boarding a boat in Italy.
But why would they even admit that, right?
It's just this pointless detail. Detail. But yeah.
Well, I guess my thing is, would they really admit to it? Meaning, if Megyn Kelly, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens are like, look, we talked to Kirk. He seemed to be wavering in this particular position. He felt some kind of way about it. He felt like he couldn't maneuver in it. Then there was the interview with Megyn Kelly where he looked like a hostage in that video. Like he forced up looked like a hostage. Ackman comes out to contest Candace Owens. Can't really push back on anything. He confirms that the meeting took place, but his thing is, yeah, but he wasn't being pressured. And it's like, okay, am I going to really believe a genocide denier that they wouldn't lie about pressuring Kirk to stay on a particular course? No, I'm not going to believe that at all. Why are all of you there? Why is he being offered hundreds of millions of dollars if indeed he's already on board for whatever is taking place? No, it just seemed very dodgy to me. So I agree with you on this.
Yeah, and I might add as well that we've also been told that he was privately contacted by Netanyahu and who offered to turn on Israeli lobby funding spigots for TPUSA and offered him an all expenses paid trip to Israel, which is a very common means by which Tel Aviv gets its hooks into people, and Kirk refused and was subsequently extremely worried that there would be consequences for daring to turn down Netanyahu. And it's like, well, I think that there's a key point here as well, which is that, look, if you look at polls in the US, overwhelmingly, the US population, it condemns very strongly what Israel is doing in Gaza, because it is undeniably a 21st century Holocaust that's being televised 24/7. We're not even seeing the full extent of it, and what we are seeing is just horrific. But the point is that, you know, younger MAGA voters, again, probably not possessed of very much sympathy for Muslims, let alone Palestinians in particular, likewise are condemnatory of Israeli actions and US support for it, right?
Yes.
So you have an individual who is very influential with younger generations of Americans who are conservatives, who are, you know, or lean rightwards, support Trump, and he's daring to break the narrative matrix on this issue to these highly influential audiences, and it's like these highly impressionable audiences from a position of some influence. Like, you know, that's exactly the kind of thing that the Israeli lobby is going to want to come down on like a ton of bricks. Like, you know, I mean, I myself am on the Anti-Defamation League's Jew hate database. For writing about Palestine, you know, little old me. You know, I'm not Charlie. I'm not Charlie Kirk by any stretch of the imagination. I don't have a net worth in the tens of millions. I don't have a YouTube show that regularly gets hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of views. I'm nobody compared to him, and like, you know, I'm considered a threat. Like, I mean, how much more of a threat would Charlie have been perceived? And I think that if we do take the view that, and I'm not suggesting that we have concrete proof of this, let alone smoking gun evidence, that there was an Israeli interest in taking him out. Well, it serves a lot of purposes. You know, it silences him permanently. It terrifies other people into silence, and as I mentioned, the people that we've spoken to in Charlie Kirk's circle are very scared. You know, about saying anything, and there are some people who just refuse to speak to us apart from to confirm aspects of our reporting, and they did so, you know, using layer upon layer of anonymizing methods to do so, and yeah, it's also. It has granted the Israeli lobby to posthumously portray Kirk as Israel's best friend, and you know, repudiate any suggestion that he was shifting away from that position. And you know, to make matters even more suspicious, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is, you know, without compunction or overseeing the genocide in Gaza and openly talking about doing the same in the West Bank when they're done, he has felt it necessary to issue multiple statements denying our reporting and suggesting it's because we get funding from Qatar. And it's like, you know, I mean, I've even seen hardcore Zionists online say that he seems to be protesting too much and he just needs to leave this alone. And it's like, yeah, like, why would you feel particularly compelled to issue denials? Like, there was a former head of Mossad who appeared on appeared on primetime US TV to rebut suggestions Israel had anything to do with this, and he said, you know, Mossad doesn't assassinate people. This is an agency it's very, the agency's motto is rise and kill first. It is notorious for carrying out often, you know, kind of daring assassinations using like poisoned toothpaste, you know, the exploding pages in Lebanon. You know, Netanyahu himself, when he was addressing US lawmakers at that 50 states, one Israel event, which was just like something out of 1984 or something, he was like, don't forget that everyone who has a smartphone in their pocket is carrying a bit of Israel with them. It's not exactly subtle, is it?
No.
So it's like, I'm staying on this, and I think that there's still a lot of unanswered questions, and I would like it would be great if more people were looking into this, because as I say, the implications for the left, but not only, anyone remotely critical of Israel are absolutely massive. We've just had a national security memorandum specifically citing Charlie Kirk shooting as a reason for cracking down on subversive elements in the US. Who's going to suffer from that, I wonder?
Yes. And in fact, I think I even have a document where I can put this document up.
Yeah.
One of the other things that is super interesting about this, you pointed out, that I didn't quite understand this one, the CCTV footage.
Yeah.
That it was directly pointed to the building. It was directly looking at the sniper's nest. And so what? But it doesn't have him. Where did he arrange the gun? Because apparently he had a screwdriver that he used to effectively set the gun up, lay in his weight, take the shot, and then use this thing to unravel the gun. Did he do all of this at the sniper's nest, or did he do this at different locations and then brought the full gun up to the sniper's nest? And I think your point is, why does nobody see him toting the gun up or putting the gun together in the sniper's nest, but you have a CCTV footage that's directly related or looking directly at him at his sniper's point? Or did I get that wrong? Did I misunderstand?
Well, no. That's exactly the thing. Is that the camera that shot the footage of this individual who's allegedly Tyler Robinson fleeing and jumping from the roof. It's quite some fall as well, and they're lugging this allegedly this very heavy rifle with them. The roof is where Tyler Robinson set up, assembled the gun using a screwdriver. I've seen a lot of people, kind of seasoned veteran shooters, including military veterans, say that you couldn't use a screwdriver to even do it. I myself am certainly not a seasoned shooter, so I couldn't testify to the veracity of that. But that it's allegedly here he sets up, it's here he takes the shot, and it would have been in the vicinity of where the camera was recording. And then these images haven't been released. And it's like, though, him shooting, let alone assembling the gun, would be, my priority to release to the public rather than footage of some unknown person jumping off the roof. But that's all we've been given. It's very, but this is the point, is that, as I say, the notion that he was shot from that roof is fundamental to the in turn the narrative that he was shot from the front, which I think is bunkum. Really, I think it's very clear that he was not shot with the ammunition it's claimed he was, and that the shot came from behind somewhere. I think that's it's pretty clear that the wound in his neck was not an exit wound. But again, that's something that authorities don't want to look into, it seems, and there are no prizes for guessing why.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because they started this in this overt political way. A left-winger who's murdered Charlie Kirk, it is probably a transgender person. And then it's like, he has a transgender girlfriend. Meaning all of this stuff started as overtly political. And I was looking up the document that you were mentioning before, right here, the White House assessment.
Yeah.
Countering domestic terrorism. And they are using Charlie Kirk as a pretext for this. Meaning they've constructed a political organization that doesn't exist. And they're using Charlie Kirk's death as saying, hey, the left wing is on a tear. By the authority vested in the president, by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, I hereby direct the following. And it says heinous assassinations and other acts of political violence in the United States have dramatically increased in recent years. Even in the aftermath of the horrifying assassination of Charlie Kirk, some individuals who adhered to the alleged shooter's ideology embrace and cheered the evil murder while actively encouraging more political violence. So, within the first paragraph, Charlie Kirk is invoked. And of course, that's when they're getting into, we're going after Antifa, we're going after these organizations. The president and his authority is effectively allowing this to take place. Yeah, agreed. But where do you think this goes? Meaning, aside from the death, aside from Charlie Kirk getting murdered and however he was murdered, what do you think they're trying to take this? I mean, if I look at the UK and Europe, they're going all the way to the point of a digital ID at this point, which is just mind-blowing, right? Like the surveillance state that they're trying to implement. Where do you think the US is trying to take this, or the right wing is taking this? And just to piggyback on this, there's military in American cities on a fake premise or fake pretext. Donald Trump has used this, and the right wing has leaned into this like heavily. Like it's the left that is committing all political violence, despite the fact that more murders are committed by basically a white guy with a gun. That's on the right. I mean, the shooting that just took place in, what was it, Michigan, I believe? Like where the guy was like a Marine who ends up killing all of those people at the Church of Latter-day Saints. Not Michigan. It wasn't Michigan. It wasn't Texas. I need to find the location, but my point remains. What do you think they're trying to take this?
Well, I mean, like I say, I think that we're living in an age of brazen tyranny where power can just, Western power structures can know that they can basically just get away with anything, and we see this with the overturning of election results in numerous countries, the banning of political parties if they don't toe the right line, the prosecution of candidates for daring to run on alternative platforms. I just think that we've reached a point where power knows its position is fragile. The social contract has broken down. People everywhere are struggling. They're struggling to survive. And there is an enormous amount of dissent against governments, particularly over issues like Gaza. There's growing discontent about the war in Ukraine, and they are governed by administrations and people who do not do anything that furthers or their interests whatsoever, or reflects their wishes. And their only response of power structures in that kind of situation is brutal crackdowns. And yes, you mentioned, like the UK seems to out of nowhere be pushing full steam ahead with digital ID, which is completely insane. The EU is instituting new rules as of, I think it's in a few weeks in October. They're going to start fingerprinting, DNA swabbing, taking biometric data of any non-EU individual entering the bloc, and then retaining this data for indeterminate periods of time. This is their only response, is just further crackdowns. Now, I mean, I know many Palestine solidarity activists in the UK who have been arrested, are facing jail, are willing to do things that might put them in jail because they reason, well, they can't put us all in jail. Well, having the army on the streets and having digital IDs that, you can be prosecuted for not having in your possession if you get stopped and asked for it. That's as good as being in prison. And I think, more generally, I think this is Western power structures desperately trying to maintain their positions when they have zero legitimacy. As bleak as this is, history does show us that it's usually when power structures are on the verge of collapse that they're most brutal and repressive. So, better things could be around the corner. It's just a pity that we have to live through the interim, and it could get very nasty, indeed. And I neglected to mention that there was one thing that really made my antenna twitch was, in a seemingly coordinated way, there are a large number of individuals, right-wing influencers in the US, who immediately upon Charlie Kirk shooting were like, "This is civil war," and actually, I think it's interesting that hasn't particularly taken hold. I mean, yes, the National Guard has been deployed to numerous cities, but people aren't going along with it. They're not stupid. They can see what's being done. They see that there are traps being laid for them, and they're not walking into them. And I think that in a strange way, for all of its many faults, living in a social media age makes tyranny a bit more difficult to get away with, because you have people who can point out discrepancies in official narratives, who can analyze footage independently and publicize, findings that deviate from the official line, and ask very serious questions of power. If this was the 1960s, say, we saw what happened with the Warren Commission, where, it was quite clearly a tissue of lies, but that was the stock line and it was accepted. But because there was, zero serious mechanism for public pushback against it.
Yeah. I mean, but how do you explain the Ukraine war, for example? Like, you overthrow a country, you flood the zone with just nonsense about Russia trying to take over all of Ukraine, all of Europe with 150,000 people. You have people who believe this. You take over social media, you get rid of the media in Europe. So if you're living in Europe, you may not have an alternative point of view. My ex, for example, they didn't have an alternative point of view. There was no RT, there was no Sputnik, there was nothing that would give them this other take. Like, they still are pretty effective at killing any notion of, like, meaning when they need to put the blanket down, they put the blanket down on a lot of this information. I agree with you. You can go to websites, especially if you're already primed for those websites and you're already arranged in a certain point of view. But the majority of the populace, I don't know, man. Maybe you're right, but I'm not sure.
Well, it's interesting that if you actually, despite the total informational blackout and the outright banning and censorship, I gather from people I know in Europe who don't use VPNs, when they log into X, it's like every other post is, this has been blocked under European laws, because it's about Palestine or Ukraine. But anyway, what's amazing is that public opinion has turned significantly against the war in Ukraine, despite this total media political unanimity on the proxy war on Palestine. Initially, the media tried to frame Hamas's actions as somehow, we had all the stories about the beheaded babies shoved in ovens and the gang rapes and all this other rubbish. Some people did believe this, and there was, the media desperately tried to frame Israel's response as, a counterattack against Hamas. Nobody believes it anymore. Actual and the ensuing crackdowns. Even normies are seeing that. Well, you've got grandmothers in the UK being arrested for holding a sign saying "I support Palestine action."
Yes.
And it's like people are increasingly waking up to this, because it's just it's so brazen now. We're talking today. Over the weekend, George Galloway, a veteran British politician with a huge following, who does a very popular YouTube show, suffered. He and his wife, entering Gatwick Airport, suffered the same fate I did when I landed in London last in May 2023. Stopped under counter-terrorism legislation, had their digital devices taken, interrogated for hours. This is a someone who spent decades in Parliament. Like, they are off the leash, but at the same time, there's mass pushback against this. And I saw a lot of people who hate George Galloway's guts on a personal and political level condemning this, and it's like and even the mainstream media has been forced to report on his ordeal. So it's like, I do think this stuff does have the capacity to break through. It might take some time, and again, it might be painful for a lot of people getting there. But there is the promise of something better. And I think, perfect example. Even though I think it's basically meaningless. The recognition of Palestine by the UK and France and other countries, this didn't just happen. Like, they didn't just do this out of the goodness of their hearts, and they didn't. It was due to mass public pressure. Like, people are a lot more powerful individually and collectively than they give themselves credit for.
Yeah. It's a pressure relief valve, but they're doing it for reasons, right? It's like otherwise they wouldn't have done it at all. Kit, man, I have appreciated this conversation.
Always.
One last thing, real quick. Moldova, in this conversation, does Europe know? Do they realize how jacked up the Moldovan election is? I mean, this. I guess this goes to the whole conversation of whether or not propaganda works or whether or not they even care. But all of the extraordinary actions that they took in order to steal that election and basically, overthrow the will of the public by hook or by crook. Does Europe know that when this stuff happens? Do they see this when they see Romania, Colin Gogechku, where they're trying to get rid of him? Do they actually see this, and do they think to themselves, "Man, Europe is a dictatorship," or do they think to themselves, "Well, obviously you have to stop the Russians"? I'm curious, and we have about 2 minutes.
Well, I mean, very, very quickly I actually think that they know that the time is running out, which is why they are moving so quickly to try and entrench and further their power, and they are being so openly authoritarian and repressive. But I mean, there was a very interesting BBC article published at the end of last year in the wake of the Romanian coup that overturned Georgescu's victory, and there was a very interesting quote in it from a Romanian former NATO official who said, "We've bought ourselves some time, but there are real problems here, and it could blow up in our faces." And it's like, I think that they do understand this.
They know it.
They understand that they're in real trouble, and their only response is more repression, which creates a self-defeating cycle. Mm-hmm. The more repressive you get, the more people are in your crosshairs, the more people fight back. It's a pity we have to live through that period a bit, but I call it bloody-minded optimism. But I do think that there might be a happy ending in it at some stage. But God willing, inshallah.
Well, I am optimistic for the long term, very pessimistic for the short term. I think these people are
likewise.
Thank you for this, man. A great breakdown, as always.
My pleasure.
Great breakdown. Kit Clarenberg, he is an investigative journalist documenting the role of intelligence service in shaping politics and perceptions. You can find his work at Global Delinquents and the Gray Zone UK. Kit, I will put your article at the bottom of this so people can go through it with a fine-tooth comb. Thank you for this, man. You be safe, okay?
Yeah, you too. Take care of yourself. Nice one, brother.
All right. Kit is awesome. Shout out to him. He has written a great article. In fact, Kit has a few good articles at where is it? Did I put it down? Did I put it down? I did put it down. Yeah, Kit has a few good articles on global delinquents. Actually, no, I didn't. It's right here. And you can check his work out. Also, Gray Zone UK. You can check his work out there also. This is just one, but if you hit the website, you can see some of the latest articles that he came up with. So Kit is fantastic. Shout out to him for joining me. What time is it? All right, Mark is about to come on. At some point, we are going to have to discuss Tucker Carlson's 9/11 documentary. It is eye-opening. And that was only the first episode. It put you in the mind of and these two things are not similar, even though they kind of are in the way that I'm thinking about it. R. Kelly. If you ever watch R. Kelly's documentary, where they're talking about all of the women that R. Kelly beat up, sexually assaulted, all of the women that he was pedophile to, and all this other stuff. The very first episode, you walked out of that episode thinking, that mofo is guilty of sin. He's going to jail. That's how bad it was. That's how bad the first episode was. And they had 4 or 5 other episodes left. I don't know how many scenes or segments are going to be in the documentary that Tucker Carlson is putting out for the 9/11 Commission or the 9/11 thing. But God, that is a damning video. And this is not Tucker giving his point of view. This is people who were there associated with it, with the documentation in order to back up everything that he's saying along the way. Oh, it is devastating. Because the argument that Tucker makes, and that the people who were around him at the time, meaning the people who were in the FBI, the CIA, etc., is that the U.S. was tracking the terrorists who was on the planes, allowed them to come into the country, because the CIA, for all intents and purposes, wanted to bring them in as assets. And so without telling the FBI, without giving the FBI heads up that this stuff was effectively taking place, they're like, we'll manage it. We'll watch it. We'll pay attention to it. And then at the point where 9/11 took place, of course, at that point, they blamed Saudi Arabia. They blamed everybody else associated with it. They acted like they had nothing to do with it. And oh, golly gee, this just took place. We had no idea. The gentleman who was from the FBI, who was directly involved in it, there's a sense of shame, humiliation, anger, guilt, all of these things that are built into his dialogue and assessments on this stuff, because from his point of view, look, man, I knew this was taking place. I tried to give the information over to the FBI. They wouldn't let me do it. It's good. It is good. Tucker did good work on that. No BS. But my guest is here. My guest is here. Tucker called Mark Sloboda. How you doing, Mark? You doing okay this morning? Well, this evening for you?
I don't know really how to take that. Tucker Carlson? I mean,
well, no, I was talking about Tucker.
Really, Jamal?
No, Tucker did a 9/11 documentary, and it was good. It was exceptional, actually. And I was talking to the audience about that as I switched over, and my brain just lingered. No, Mark Sloboda, the one and only international relations security analyst, as I always call him, the best in the business. How you doing? And by the way, you can find Mark on Boosty, Boosty. You can look up Realpolitik with Mark Sloboda, or just Mark Sloboda. You doing okay today? You having a good one?
I'm alive, Jamal. How are you? Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
It's always an honor and a pleasure to have you, man. Like I said, best in the business. I don't say that flippantly. I don't say that for everybody. Actually, I think you're the only person I say that to. There's been a lot of stuff that has taken place over the last few days. We've had the Moldovan elections, which weren't elections at all, because elections require an actual election as opposed to this kind of biased, heavy-handed approach that Europe went to ensuring that their candidate won. You also had a major strike that took place on Ukraine that was, if I'm not mistaken, the largest missile drone strike of this war. Let's start there. What was the objective with all of the missiles? Obviously to degrade the enemy and everything else, but where were those missiles for the most part localized? Where were they trying to hit? What were they trying to take down?
Okay, so all we know is really anecdotal statements from the Kiev regime side. There has been no official statement that I have seen yet about the number of drones and missiles that were involved, or perhaps the breakdown between the two of them. Okay. We do know that there was at least 60 missiles fired. Right. That is what I have heard from the Russian side. And that is more than usual. What we have seen in the last 2 or 3 months is pretty regular strikes with upwards of 300, 400, 500 drones, right? Ground strike drones of various iterations with a certain number of decoys and reconnaissance amongst that. And then roughly around 20 or 30 missile strikes in the same evening, which, according to the production numbers that we have gotten from the Western media about Russian missiles, that means that Russia is shelving missiles, right? That they're stockpiling, that they're not firing everything that they're making on a regular basis. Preparing for
a third world war. Yeah.
War with NATO. Right, yeah. Direct war with NATO. This latest strike, we saw perhaps 2 or 3 times the usual number of missiles, and a presumption of, again, hundreds of Garan drones. We don't know how many. Anecdotally, we're told that this may be the largest strike. Now, remember, we've reported that now several times in the last 2 months because the largest one keep increasing in size. So this would probably then be in excess of 700 missiles and drones if that were true. And again, not having a breakdown between the two of them is really not very useful. It would be much more useful to know roughly how many drones and how many missiles. But what we're told of the strikes by the Kiev regime is they all hit kitten rescue centers, civilians, and kindergartens, hospitals. Especially maternity wards, and residential buildings. Right. And the reality, of course, is that these strikes were a number of targets, right, across the country. But the principle was military industrial centers in, shall we say, the center of the country, Kiev, and the central areas of the country. And also one of the largest airfields in Ukraine got hit. Starokonstantinovka, again in the center of the country, got hit really hard. We don't know how hard, right? Because we're not hearing much from the Kiev regime. But we know that those were the targets. And we have some videos of incoming drone and missile strikes that are filmed by locals in Ukraine at risk of, imprisonment and so forth, and released on Telegram. And but other than that, we don't know much for certain. Well, we never know much for certain. We know what the Kiev regime tells us, and then usually the Russian Ministry of Defense just says something like all targets were engaged. that's So, but usually it does give us a rough idea of the numbers involved, and this time we don't have that. But there was an exchange of fire. The Kiev regime did also conduct strikes out of Belgorod, or into Belgorod, out of actually Kharkov city. And we have video from on the ground in Kharkov of these multiple launch rocket systems being fired. And I presume that this is HIMARS because of the range involved. So they were fired from within Kharkov, which is, of course, a war crime to fire a multiple launch rocket system from a civilian area using their own civilians as cover. Not that they haven't regularly done this during the conflict, but I mean, this time there's a clear video. They targeted energy infrastructure in Belgorod, which did result in temporarily, for a number of hours, power going off in Belgorod. What I find, most telling about that is this is a long-range strike in mainland Russia, right, if you will, not a parts of what was formerly Ukraine that Russia now claims, but Russia by a HIMARS system. And we have previously been told by the U.S., by New York Times, multiple times, we have been told that every single HIMARS strike receives targeting data and green light from the United States. Yes. Every single strike. And over the weekend, we heard news from the Trump administration that they were perfectly fine with long-range strikes within Russia, meaning with U.S. provided weapons, whether they go through a NATO middleman or this fiction of trying to separate themselves, political responsibility from the conflict, while absolutely nothing policy-wise has changed. Now, there have not been such long-range strikes using these HIMARS system, using ATACMS missiles, since Trump took office. So this is a direct return to the Biden policy that was taking place right before Trump took office, a policy that himself, Trump at the time, said was crazy and would lead directly to World War III, right? He said that straight up. So now he has returned to that policy. And that's what we have. These strikes cannot take place without, not only U.S. intelligence, right, and targeting and green light, but U.S. personnel, U.S. technical specialists that are there. Now, there might be an actual Ukrainian pushing the button or in the room when the button, in the area when the button is pushed. But this, let's cut through the BS. This was a Trump administration missile strike on a Russian city. That's it.
Yes. I guess the question is, what is the Russian response to this? They're going to just continue the course, no changes.
More
This is
than likely.
effectively what was happening
I
with Joe
don't
Biden.
think you're going to see a big. I mean, Russia is continually increasing the number of its long range strikes already. Right?
Yes.
They could easily claim that any next big strike is a response, but I don't think yet that they will respond to the Trump administration. I mean, they're certainly not going to respond to either rhetorically. I don't think, because they're still playing the game of blowing smoke up Trump's posterior. Right? They're still playing that game. They're still playing the diplomatic game with Trump, where at least Putin and, shall we say, Peskov, and people directly associated with the president, never says anything particularly offensive or critical against Trump, right? No matter what Trump himself says. Now, Medvedev is the designated bad cop and has occasionally said disparaging things about Trump, but then he usually returns to, as he has recently, more neutral language, and it's this game of buttering Trump, of manipulating Trump that everyone plays, right? The Europeans play it, the Arab states play it, the people in his own administration and Congress play it. Everyone plays this game of manipulating Trump, and the Kremlin is still, for whatever reason that they are, even though it hasn't really achieved anything. I mean, could you argue it's bought them some time? I mean, not really. I don't think that's actually. I don't think it's bought them anything, because the Trump administration hasn't, is withholding from, shall we say, more sanctions simply because it doesn't have more sanctions that it can issue, right?
Right.
I mean, maybe it gave them a few months without long-range missile strikes, but those aren't. Those are at best, maybe not flea stings, but bee stings, right? They're not, certainly not enough to, divert Russia's course in the conflict, strategically, politically, or anything like that. Now, we also have a lot of talk now again about tomahawks.
Yes. And I could play the clip if you want by Kellogg, where Kellogg is pointing out effectively. But see, this one is a little bit weird, because they're attributing something. I'll play for you first, and we can discuss after. This is Kellogg. I believe this is Fox News, obviously.
That's one of the reasons I believe.
I just want to clarify. Are you saying that it is the president's position that Ukraine can conduct long-range strikes into Russia, that has been authorized by the president?
I think reading what he has said, and reading what Vice President Vance has said, as well as Secretary Rubio, the answer is yes. Use the ability to hit deep. There are no such things as sanctuaries. That's one of the reasons I believe that this last week, and it has been confirmed, that President Zelensky asked President Trump to get Tomahawk missiles, which give you a depth. They're really good systems. America makes the best systems in the world.
Are we giving him the Tomahawks?
Well, that decision has not been made, but he's asked him.
So Zelensky is asked. I mean, this entire comment to me is a little bit weird.
It is. Does Kellogg not know what the Trump administration is he still trying to provide a degree of vagueness that Trump himself perpetuates, even though he knows they're doing the opposite? We don't know. But from what Trump and Vance have said, that's what he says. He didn't say that this is the policy, right? Even though he is supposedly Trump's personal envoy to, babysit the Kiev regime in Ukraine or whatever.
Exactly.
He does not say that there is a definitive policy, right? Policy change, even though obviously there is, because these strikes just took place. And he obviously is pushing himself hard on the issue of tomahawks. right?
Yes.
The delivery of Tomahawks. He's obviously advocating and pushing for that within the Trump administration. Now, the Tomahawks are, they're an older cruise missile. They're already, pretty long in the tooth. They have, of course, received some upgrades over time. But I think most importantly with the Tomahawks is the question of delivery, because until the U.S. pulled out of the Short and Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, Tomahawks were not allowed and supposedly didn't have the capability to be fired from the ground, right? That was something that was forbidden according, to that bilateral treaty between the U.S. and Russia. Now, they were launched from air, right? From aircraft and from submarines, right? That's why for the last decades we've seen pictures of Tomahawks launched from submarines, aircraft, some surface ships, and the like. But so now we do know that the U.S. has suddenly rolled out, as if it always had them, a certain number of them anyway, ground-based launchers, Typhoon systems, which Germany itself has been pushing to have delivered to Europe, evidently, that can fire the Tomahawks. But these are, let's gonna be honest, these are big, cumbersome targets, right? They would have to travel on roads. They would be very obvious, which means that they would probably, if they transferred Tomahawks, they would have to be fired from probably F-16s, right? And that means the F-16s would have to come out of hiding in West Ukraine, where they've been occasionally just falling out of the sky, evidently, through bad piloting of these prickly old aircraft, I would say, due to lack of proper training. And they would have to come close to the contact line, which would mean exposing them to Russia's more modern aircraft with much longer range radar and much longer range air-to-air missiles, right? As well as exposing them to Russian air defense systems like the S-400, which would, it would be extremely dangerous. They would rapidly start using the capability of firing them. But I think the most important thing when considering transferring the Tomahawks, well, again, they have to be fired by Americans. This is not a system that can be fired by Ukrainians. So it would be another long-range sister fired by the Americans. But also, it is a strategic weapon as well as a conventional one, which means it can carry a nuclear warhead. Which means that if they were fired, by, quote, Kiev, i.e. the Americans, into Russia, that every shot Russia would not have an immediate knowledge of whether that missile heading to, I don't know, Moscow, Russian military command in Rostov, St. Petersburg, is carrying a conventional or a strategic warhead, a first strike capability. And you can say, oh, it's unlikely, the Americans wouldn't do that. That's fine. But militaries don't work on those terms. Militaries are they work on contingencies. They have to prepare for the worst case scenario, and they have to consider the possibilities, the worst possibilities of every potential such strike, which means they would have to consider responding in kind with a nuclear strike on the United States or U.S. military facilities in Europe. So that is probably why the Biden administration ultimately held off on providing the Tomahawks, even though there was talk of this month ago when Biden was still in office. But now this talk is resuscitated. And you have a number of people within the Trump administration, within the Congress, within Europe, that are just apparently dying for World War III, that are literally, begging for direct conflict with Russia, potentially of a nuclear nature. And obviously from his article last week in The Atlantic, the arch neocon Robert Kagan, the husband of Victoria Nuland, is one of those, because he was advocating for exactly that America should not be afraid of any Russian response. They should just pretend that there will be no response. Basically, because Russia has not provided a response of that kind, against the proxy masters, as Kagan himself admitted, according to historical and military precedent, Russia has every right to do, and he wonders why Russia hasn't done it. And he chooses to interpret it as Russian weakness. Whether that is military weakness or weakness of will, that is how he interprets it, which is, to me, a water slide directly to apocalypse.
It is, but see, this is the argument I used to make with Iran also, that every step that you've taken out of pragmatism has not been interpreted as pragmatic. It's just been interpreted
weakness.
They're weak. It eggs them on.
Okay.
Wow. Okay, so if a Tomahawk missile hits Moscow, all bets are off. Or are all bets are off? I mean, at that point...
Yeah,
Russia
not even
like
hitting. If a Tomahawk is launched towards Moscow, then all bets are off.
They don't seem to be concerned about nuclear war. I don't, and I got to be honest.
I mean, some people may be, but obviously there are enough people, within the Trump administration, within the European political elite, that do not fear nuclear war.
So in their mind, Russia is not going to respond. In their mind, if they put troops in Ukraine, Russia is not really going to respond. They're just saying they're going to respond, but they're not really going to respond.
Yes.
As if there's no line that, that Russia at some point will say, we don't have a choice. But they said that about Ukraine also, though. This idea of, well, we can invade Ukraine, we can overthrow the government of Ukraine, Russia's not going to respond. Russia did respond to that.
Yes.
Yeah, this is terrifying. This is terrifying. There was another article that came out for right here. This is NATO troops arrive in Odessa to occupy Moldova. Now this gets, and maybe I should ask it this way. Why is Moldova so important to the European Union where they're willing to go this far above their skis to effectively cheat? I know Transnistria, for example, preventing Transnistria from voting is another thing. Giving Russia 2 polling locations, which is just amazing, right, for the size of Russia, and giving Europe hundreds. Like, why was this election so important from their point of view? Because they were talking about, literally, if the election went a different way, sending NATO troops to occupy Moldova because they thought it was going to, quote, go to the Russians.
Yeah, okay, so real quick, first, just a narrative thing that's going on before I forget it, because I know I will. There have been several comments in the last week, narrative from both sides, right? This has come from Lavrov, right, who said that we are at war with NATO, right? He said it. Peskov said the same thing. We're at war. What do you want? Donald Tusk said it, right? The Polish leader. We are at war. We cannot lose this conflict, right? So that sets the stage. Both sides, leaders, of some at least countries within NATO, right? We've heard it from numerous other officials before, of course, and Russia, at the very highest, or next to the very highest level, are saying that we're at war. Okay, so Moldova is a small country that was once a part of the Soviet Union, wedged between Ukraine and Romania, right, on the Black Sea. It is historically, ethnically, and politically divided country between a history of Romania, being associated with Romania, and a history of being associated with the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. Elections, Moldova is a very poor, corrupt country. In the early 90s, as the Soviet Union self-dissolved, there was civil conflict in Moldova, as there were in several parts of the former Soviet Union. It's basically over nationalist and identity issues. that resulted in a separatist region in Transnistria being formed on the border, on the far eastern border of Moldova, wedged up against Ukraine, which of course at the time was not, then a Banderite enemy of Russia. And it was resolved eventually with a certain number of Russian peacekeepers being put in Moldova by UN Security Council resolution agreement, and they remain there to this day. Although they're usually, attacked, as Russian occupation by the West that wants to prove them being put there. There's some 1,200 Russian troops there to this day that are essentially, at the moment, since the conflict in Ukraine, Russia cannot easily reinforce them, resupply them, anything, right? Basically, they have to be smuggled in and out through the Moldovan capital, essentially, and that's the same way they receive supplies. If Transnistria were now to be attacked by the Kiev regime, by NATO forces, by Moldova's regular military, Russia would have a nearly impossible task of defending those peacekeepers. They would probably have to surrender, to be perfectly honest, because Russia would have to, it's also landlocked, right? They would have to do a airlift over Kiev regime controlled territory in Ukraine, where they would certain to have some air defense or aircraft lying in ambush and that sort of thing. And then, you would, even if you got troops in, you would have to keep them resupplied. It's an impossible defensive position there. So along with Ukraine, Moldova, as well as Georgia, were these three next tier countries that were being pushed by the West for inclusion in both NATO and the EU, right? That they were the next targeted countries, right? Ukraine, right, was the big prize, but also Moldova and Georgia. And Moldova, over the last few years, they have very divided politics. Every election is on a knife edge between, ultimately, there are, of course, domestic issues and left-right issues, left liberal issues. It's not really left-right, left-liberal issues, old-school left liberal issues, domestically, issues of, a large part of the Moldovan population speak Romanian and identify as Romanian, essentially. And a lot of them would like to actually join Romania. And there are others, particularly minority groups, prominent minority groups in Moldova, not only in Transnistria, that still look to Russia. And when you add up, it's, essentially a kind of a 45-45 split, with the last 10% swinging, in every election. And in the last several years, they've had a fiercely pro-Western leader, Maia Sandu, as president, whom is pushing them to the brink of joining the West and the Kiev regime in the conflict with Russia and Ukraine. Right? I mean, her rhetoric, she's been targeting any not pro-Western. I mean, you could say pro-Russian, but usually it's just not rabidly anti-Russian, as is always the case. But anyone who questions a pro-NATO, pro-EU orientation is targeted with, shall we say, politicized legal weapons, right? Because that's what it is. They're going after. They're saying this. Essentially, what they're saying is this isn't a geopolitically unacceptable political opinion, and we will lock you up, ban you from running, get anything we can on any possible excuse we can generate to keep you from having that position. Now, over the weekend, Moldova had very, again, knife's edge parliamentary elections. And Maia Sandu was, even in the hours of this weekend, still banning socialist and pro-Russian opposition parties, right? Two of them just going in the hours right before the election. And they pull out all the administrative stops to try to make sure the vote, and the vote was razor edge. And yeah, do we really know the results of the election? All right, so most of the people in Transnistria, which still have the right to vote in elections, were prevented from voting. Right, there's some 400,000 people there, some 200,000 voters, and only a few thousand of them, because they made them cross the bridge into Moldova, the bridges into Moldova to cross the Dnistr River there, and most of the bridges were closed out. Right, the construction work on election day to prevent them from going over. So out of the 200,000 votes, only a few thousand were able to be cast. Right, yeah. And on top of that, Moldova has a big diaspora. Why? Because Moldova has a shit economy, and a lot of people go out of the country to work. Right, the largest portion of those to Russia. Right, and also large numbers of them to Europe, and everything was done like laying out the red carpet, busing them into the voting centers, right, to the embassy, wherever voting centers were set up in Europe, right, yep. In Romania, in Italy, in Germany, in the UK, wherever they were, dozens and dozens of voting centers, and then in Russia, which has some 200 or 300,000 Moldovans, right? Residents. There were 2 voting stations, and they were only given a few thousand ballots for those several 100,000 people, and only 4,000 votes from the diaspora within Russia were able to vote. By the way, Ukraine has done the same thing, except they just forbid Ukrainians in Russia from voting over the last quote unquote elections in Ukraine. It's all perfectly fine with the West because Russia, right? I mean, that's everything. If you're a pro-Russian party, it's okay to ban you because Russia, right? I mean, that's the way their democracy works, right? Yeah. Anyway, the opposition, no matter what, whichever way the official count, quote unquote, of this election went, the other side was not going to respect the results. And indeed, the main opposition party leader, Dodon, whom is old school lefty, right, with some modern, shall we say, pragmatic elements. He's a political beast of his own. He has already announced that he won't respect these results because what the results showed was, if you take the vote within Moldova, the opposition won. If you add in the abroad vote with all these basically ballot stuffing going on in European countries, and the diaspora in Russia prevented from voting, right, by every administrative means, then that gets close enough to overturn the results and put the election into like 0.2% in the Maya Sandu pro-Western camp. And they're already, of course, proclaiming victory. The opposition is not accepting these results. Of course, the West is already proclaiming that, that it was a decisive vote in favor of the Western orientation. Okay, I mean, certainly not of the people actually living in Moldova. But that's what we heard from the EU high foreign policy muckety muck Kaja Kallas and other European leaders already. But lots of things happening in the meantime. We have these reports that British and French troops are in Ukraine on the ground in Odessa, ready to move into Transnistria, right? Not just Moldova, but where the separatist part of Moldova, where the Russian peacekeepers are. We have Russia. We have the Kiev regime. First, the Kiev regime in Ukraine passed a bill last week allowing them to put their troops in foreign countries, meaning in this particular situation, the immediate context is Moldova, right? To put troops into Moldova. very easy for them. They're right there. Yes, and a buildup of troops. Also, among Russia's strikes this weekend, particularly on Saturday, Russia was pounding the trains and electrical infrastructure in that border there, Transcarpathia, which is way far from the contact lines, like not a normal strike element at all. Obviously, with the intent to stop a rapid transfer of troops into Moldova, meaning that they probably, I don't think they would do that unless they had a real fear that the Kiev regime was about to send troops into Moldova, or even, Transnistria, part of Moldova. So lots of explosive things already happening on the ground, and protests are happening right now in Chisinau, in the Moldovan capital, of course, and there will be, of course, an attempt to drive those protesters out. They will attempt to not recognize the new parliamentary government. It's an explosive situation, and I have said since early 2022 that I did not see this conflict ending without Moldova being drawn into it, because it's being pushed on the same page as Ukraine. It's being dragged into NATO and the EU, and you have this Maya Sandu who is all too willing to throw her country. Georgia now has leaders that said, no, we will not be, we have our own issues with Russia, but we will not be your Ukraine. We will not open a second front against Russia. We are not going to be suicide for your geopolitical interests. We'll work out our own differences with the Russians, right? But Maya Sandu in Moldova is clearly on the other side. She is willing to toss her country into war to be part of the geopolitical West, to be part of the cool club, to sit with the cool clubs, the cool kids in the cafeteria, right? That's where she is. Despite the fact that, obviously, you could quibble 0.2% either way, but at least half the country is fiercely against. And it's an explosive situation. It is a.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is Russia willing to go to war over Transnistria?
They have not been up until now. They've done everything possible to avoid it. They've played very low key with Transnistria over recent years. There have been energy crises before in Moldova and Ukraine, with the gas being supplied to Moldova being shut down by Ukraine, and then arrangements being made, but then shutting down the power to Transnistria. But then again, Transnistria also has a hydroelectric power plant there that is actually important in Moldova, and really shady behind backdoor arrangements were made between Russia and Moldova to keep the power onto Moldova proper and Transnistria respectively. We don't know the details of those things. Nothing has ever been released. Neither side wants to talk about it, but that obviously took place, right, in the last year. But things have come to a head again, and it's of course being pushed by Ukraine, by Maya Sandu, by those figures within European NATO that want war with Russia. This is a perfect opportunity to expand the conflict horizontally into Moldova. And even though Moldova is not part of NATO in the EU, there's already NATO troops on the ground in Moldova. The French troops have been there for a long period of time. American forces have been right there in Romania as well. It's a powder keg, right? And it's like Ukraine, right? At this point, as far as NATO, as far as the collective West is concerned, they have marked Moldova just like Ukraine, right? Like a dog, marking its territory. They have marked that, saying this is ours now, and there will be no retreat from it. They're already waging that geopolitical fight in Ukraine, right? Which they say they're in a war and they can't lose it, again and again. And Moldova is just this small little extra bit, on the side of this conflict that has been kind of brewing this entire time. And ultimately, for those people who want to expand this to include NATO, that will be the perfect opportunity to do so by expanding it horizontally first into Moldova. And chances are then that will create such an outrage. Russia attempting to reform the Soviet Union, blah, 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 that will provide the spark for the direct NATO-Russia conflict that so many people so many leaders within the West clearly want.
Correct me if I'm wrong. It seems that all of this false flag stuff is aimed at that already, or creating a narrative for it already. I mean,
Sure.
Drones in Denmark, drones in Sweden.
Yeah,
we believe that
the new line out of Zelensky, and I've heard some Europeans, is that they're being flown from the Russian shadow fleet, i.e. the international maritime tankers without insurance in London that don't care about Western sanctions and continue to do business transporting Russian oil anyway, right? Most of them are not even Russian-owned, flag of convenience or anything like that. It's just the global maritime shipping industry, right? We had a report out last week that, according to the West, some 17% of the world's oil shipping fleet is now, quote unquote, part of Russia's shadow fleet, i.e. conducting business with Russia still. Right. Now they're claiming that these ships, again, most of which are not actually Russian ships, they're just bringing oil in and out of Russia for the money, is where the drones that have been buzzing over Denmark and doing nothing, apparently, are being done. Again, a clear provocation and false flag. And not only are they attempting to say it's Russian drones, but they're also then trying to choke off Russian oil traffic through the Baltic Sea, saying that that the drones are off these ships, giving the European countries another excuse to try to intercept Russian international ships carrying Russian oil in the narrow lane of international waters in the Baltic Sea, claiming some type of first it was going to be an insurance pretext, and they backed off of that, and now it will be a BS security pretext because they could be carrying Russian drones, right? That is the excuse. And again, it is another attempt to start a direct NATO-Russia war, because if you start intercepting Russian shipping in the Baltic Sea, they've already sent convoys, sent ships with naval convoys. They've already sent jets out to stop the attempted boarding of one ship. It is an act of war, right, to stop another country's ships in international waters. Now, it has to be said that it is a act of war that the U.S. regularly commits against North Korea and Iran and Venezuela and other countries, but never before with Russia, of course, being a nuclear, at least a nuclear superpower, and now clearly a conventional superpower by some measures as well. But again, it is another spark, another pouring gasoline out by those who want war between NATO, meaning also the U.S. with Russia. And there's a lot of people in Europe, a lot of leaders in Europe, the Baltics, Poland, the Scandinavian countries, the UK, that are, and now Germany with merits, are Poland are extremely hot for it.
So what's the thought that the U.S. is going to save them in this? Like, meaning, because I have two thoughts. One is that the belief is, well, the Ukrainian military is in a bad shape, regardless of whether they would admit it. They know it. They get the
Yes.
military information and what's forth. And in their minds, we need to intervene before Ukraine collapses. If
Yeah,
the
and they're
military
doing this now while Russia is still fighting in the Donbass, not when Russia is moving on Kharkov
Exactly.
or Kiev or Odessa, which is something that I've always said that pressure will increase, right? But we're already at this point, and Russia is just at the point of taking Pokrovsk and Seversk and Kupiansk at this point, right? Still within the Donbass or southern Kharkov. So this is, I mean, it's just kind of an inevitable end. This was never going to, the West made clear they could not lose this conflict, and they tried to end it on their terms diplomatically with bluff and bluster and sticks and some paltry attempts at carrots and with Trump, but that has not worked. So now they're back to the provocation and the escalation.
So is it fair to say that both sides assume there's a World War III, and both
Yes.
sides are effectively maneuvering, in one side creating justification to getting involved in Ukraine?
Both sides consider it, if not inevitable, then very likely.
What's the difference? Well, and the reason why I'm asking what's the difference is if all of your plans are geared around a third world war, then you're kind of assuming that there's going to be a third world war. Like, for example, Russia. I would wager that, as you pointed out, Russia's saving missiles. Okay, why are they saving missiles? They're saving missiles for a larger conflict later on. Russia is taking its time, and it's going to slow inexorable push with this idea of damaging Europe before the war actually starts. Europe is taking its time to try to create a pretext to justify either getting daddy's attention or to justify getting involved in Ukraine before the Ukrainian military collapses. Meaning, and I guess it's rational in an irrational way. If you don't care about nuclear war, you don't.
So
want
what's
Ukraine.
the difference?
Yeah.
The difference is between someone intent on suicide and driving their car straight off a cliff into the sea, and two people driving their cars at high speed, playing chicken towards that same cliff, hoping that the other person will divert course first. That's the difference.
Both cars are going off that cliff.
Yep.
Yeah, both cars are going off that cliff. What is their thinking from your point of view? Do they think that daddy will save them ultimately?
Yes, of course they do. Of course they do.
So they fully believe in their minds Donald Trump will not let us get into a war without necessarily adding the United States support to that war, meaning sending in troops and everything
Donald Trump,
else.
who cares? What does Donald Trump mean? Donald Trump doesn't run big foreign policy decisions in the United States.
Well,
He doesn't.
Let's say the U.S. government sending U.S. troops.
U.S. government. Yes, they believe that the U.S. government, meaning the deep state, the institutions of power, if a direct war with Russia starts, right, where Russia is hitting targets, logistics, military bases within European territory, or shooting down European planes or whatever, wherever they are, then yes, they believe that the United States, they will invoke Article 5 of the NATO Charter, and they believe that the U.S. will then come to their aid, militarily, maybe initially with the hopes of keeping it to a conventional conflict, which is, a fool's game, because somebody will start to lose very quickly, which they will regard as unacceptable. They believe it, and I believe it. I believe the U.S. will do that. They have to. They can't. Whether Trump is particularly disposed towards it or not, he's not going to be given that choice. Right? Policy options will be presented him. Things will be. Yeah. Trump can't keep one position constant on anything for more than 15 minutes, or maybe a week, right? He's shifts, he's pulled left and right. Last week again, he was, Ukraine can win this thing, and we'll provide all of our weapons. They'll just be laundered through Europe, through NATO, and no policy changes, not more, not war, but obviously at least a rhetorical political shift, completely different from the week before. And then he called Russia a paper tiger. And then 2 days later said, I would not call them a paper tiger, right? Just like he once said that Zelensky was a dictator. And even I was like, whoa. I mean, he almost had me at that point. I'm like, you can't just take that back. When he admits Zelensky, you can't. Then that 2 days later, he takes it back. And he says, I never said that. That doesn't sound like something I'd say. So obviously the man doesn't hold any firm positions on anything. And there's so much pressure that would be applied to him. It is inconceivable, right? In the full Princess Bride sense of the word, inconceivable that Trump would not be, driven to that position, whatever he may feel or not.
So just to be clear, you accept that Trump is going to make this decision. You just are making the point of saying the level of pressure and screaming from Europe and from the U.S. intelligence, from depending on all these people, he is not going to be able to withstand that level of weight.
He's not now. He regularly is not able to withstand that pressure now. Certainly in a potential World War III situation with Russia, NATO Article 5 being invoked, no, he would not be able to. Even if he was disposed towards it. Doesn't make any sense.
But the other pressure also is you're about to end the world. That's the other bill. Like, go back to Khrushchev and Kennedy, for example. Kennedy, at the very least, didn't necessarily want to end the world. All of his generals did. And in their minds, well, you could just take part of, they'll get the East Coast, but we can destroy all of Russia. But if you remember,
there are people who think that in the United States today.
Yes, but the letter
that's regularly written about. We can win a nuclear war against Russia. It is written about.
But when it came down to it, the letter that was sent between both administrations was, in one case, panicky. And then you had the hardliners effectively basically saying, ignore the first letter that you received that came across as panicky, because they knew the world was about to end. You don't think that's going to factor into anybody's calculus? And
I think John F. Kennedy was competent, was relatively intelligent, and was later killed for what he did anyway. I don't think Donald Trump is any of those things, and they've tried to kill somebody. Tried to kill him already. Right?
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I don't have a John F. Kennedy hope in this particular Cuban Missile Crisis squared.
Just to be clear, I'm not claiming that Trump's Kennedy. I'm trying to, I guess, bring into the other counterweight to that. Yes, everybody's screaming at Donald Trump. You got to go and help your allies. You got to go help Europe. Oh my God, they're killing Europeans, et cetera, et cetera. They're getting eaten alive in a Russian blender. But then the other side of that is you're about to end the world. Just be aware. You're about to end the world. Billions of people.
The Russians will blink. They always blink. Putin's more irrational and he's afraid. They're really weak. They'll back down. They always back down. That's what they say.
Putin back down. If that was true, if that's true.
That is
this is where we are, right? Where their thought is, well, we've been provocative.
That's an armchair quarterback call. And it is. We don't have intelligence, right? They have intelligence reports. They know their limitations. They know the powers of the enemy. They know what's going on the ground to a level that we will never know. I have presented myself the argument that this is only encouraging them, that it is being read as weakness in the West, and that eventually that will lead to problems. And I have also presented the other side of the argument that Russia says we're winning. We will not be provoked out of the box where we're winning into an escalated situation where things might be up in the air.
Yeah, that's a difficult box to deal with.
That one is at a state existence level that is above my pay grade to judge.
No, I agree. It's just, if the argument is, well, Russia is weak because Russia doesn't respond in the way that is provocative or quote unquote,
the way that the West would.
Right. Yeah, and then it's like, and then you get into this kind of nuclear trade-off because one side continuously pushed the envelope, not recognizing, they were being pragmatic.
Continually refuses to accept that they're losing. Yes.
Oh, that sucks. One last question. Have you heard about a $90 billion deal? I've seen where Zelensky asked, and I've seen where he said these are the weapon systems that they wanted. I haven't seen confirmation that that was agreed upon.
No, I haven't heard any. I haven't heard any confirmation. I've heard $1 billion of arms a month, but there's no agreement because again, this is money that the Europeans would have to pay, and that certainly has not been agreed to. We would have heard about that. I've heard of an initial $500 million of money that was paid in the first such use of a program that is supposed to be transfer weapons to Ukraine. But there's no details, right? Is this production? Is this stuff that's sitting on shelves? There was no details about it whatsoever. So,
okay. So
I don't even know if that's real or at least final yet at this point. But any $90 billion or $900 trillion deal, it's all talk at this point.
Mark, you are great. Great breakdown, as always. Thank you for this. Honestly, I deeply appreciate it. Mark Sloboda, international relations security analyst, best in the business. Mark, I'm going to I'm going to get a T-shirt with best in the business on it. I will send it to you.
Can you put that on my gravestone?
No, I would rather no. People should get their flowers before they drop dead. I am a firm believer in that. But you can find Mark on Boosty at Realpolitik, Mark Sloboda. You can find him. You can also just put in Mark Sloboda. You can find him on that. You can find him on Twitter at Mark Sloboda1. Mark, you're fantastic. Thank you for this. Deeply appreciate it. And you enjoy the rest of your day, okay?
You as well.
Thank you. All right. Yeah, people should get their flowers while they're alive. What's the point when they're dead? If he wants me to send it to his gravestone, I will have somebody to send it to him just in case I'm not here. But no, man, best in the business. That didn't get the opportunity to ask Mark about this, but that's okay. A conversation was had with Lukashenko and Belarusian president and the media. Listen to what he says here. I'm pulling this clip from Daniel Davis, but obviously Daniel Davis pulled it from somebody else too. So, can't have too many feelings about me pulling this. By the way, Daniel Davis, fantastic show. Fantastic show. Fantastic show.
There is a good proposal on the table. President Putin and I discussed it. I won't talk about it. The president will say that himself. A good proposal. The proposal for Ukraine, which, among other things, was heard by Donald Trump in Alaska, was taken to Washington for consideration and discussion. A very good proposal. If the Ukrainians don't accept these proposals, it will be like at the beginning of the Cold War. It will be even worse. They will lose Ukraine.
It will be even worse. They will lose Ukraine. They will lose Ukraine. There is a lot of stuff that's not being said. And part of the reason I appreciate Mark so much is because he is pointing out the underlying details. That they can lose Ukraine. Yes, that's true, but that assumes that Europe doesn't get involved. I don't think, at the very least, I'm not sure what is in the mind of Russians, the military, as they're analyzing this stuff. But I can't believe that they're of a mindset that the West will not get involved in the war, especially looking at what is taking place now. Why the reason for the false flags if you're not going to get involved? Why, this idea of moving troops into various positions, meaning they're taking one step after the next to give this impression that we are creating a consensus in our populations to justify us getting involved. Now, the thing that may save us or may not, considering what they just did in Moldova, is that all of these people who are about to send Europeans off to die in a wood chipper are radically unpopular. Merz, radically unpopular. Starmer will be out of office soon. Macron, he will be gone. And the groups that are gaining some level of political weight or political gravitas, so in some cases, ADP, Alternative for Deutschland, AFP, Alternative for Deutschland, AFD, I'm sorry. I always get the acronym wrong. I always have to say to my head the name of the party. But they are gaining more political weight in Germany, despite the fact that Germany is going to do any and everything in their power, just like they did in Moldova or just like they did in Romania in order to keep these people out of office. Look at what they did to Marine Le Pen, literally getting her off the ballot so her upstart can run in 2027. And even then, they may still win that race. Think of all the horse trading that took place in France in order to keep the National Rally out of power, in which case Macron effectively used it to install some rando whose government just collapsed. I'm trying to say that these people are radically unpopular. And when they come up and say, hey, we need to feed you to the Russians, and we need to feed you to the Russians so we can get America into the war, will the public accept that? I don't have an answer for that question. And maybe the answer doesn't matter, because all things being equal, you will send people. Those people will get killed. And what does America do? And I agree with Mark. I think all the pressure in the world is going to be applied to Donald Trump. And I don't think it's going to be applied in this kind of one fell swoop of a nuclear war. They're going to sleepwalk their way to get closer and closer to the edge. So at the point where you finally get to the edge, there is one cognitive choice that needs to be made to end the world, where it's kind of like cheating. Caleb, I'm coming to you now. It's kind of like cheating with a woman. It's like, well, we're not cheating. We're just going out for coffee. Well, we're not cheating. We're just going out for dinner. Well, we're not cheating. We're just laying in bed together watching a movie. It's like, oh my God, my penis fell into her vagina. Who would have known? Think of that in the political space, where step by step by step, you're convincing yourself that this is not going to end up in oblivion until it ends up in oblivion. We are in a dangerous, dangerous part of history. Caleb, how you doing, my man? You doing okay?
I'm great. How about you?
I am doing well. Caleb Maupin, Center for Political Innovation. He's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst. He is an author. His last books, what is it, The Neo-Trotskyites?
Sure, Trotsky and the Neocons, yeah.
Trump, Trotsky, and the Neocons. He also had a book just before that I think is relevant to what is taking place now, and that had to do with the assassination of the CEO for that drug company. What is the name of that book? Just so the audience
Well, that's
will know.
interesting. So I originally called the book The Killing of Brian Thompson and the Danger of an American Years of Lead. And then Amazon wouldn't let me publish it with that title. So it was just called The Danger of an American Years of Lead. And it's on Amazon under that name. And it's under the original name on lulu.com. But the Years of Lead has been something that a lot of people have been referring to. I wrote this book back in December as kind of my reaction to the media celebrating Luigi Mangione. And, you know, I said that was leading to a dangerous, dangerous place. And I brought up the Years of Lead in Italy as this intelligence manipulation when you had all this crazy political violence in order to keep Italy in NATO and prevent the left and the right from coming together to leave NATO and the coalition government that Aldo Moro wanted to propose. And I talked about that. And now, since the assassination of Charlie Kirk, everybody's talking about Years of Lead. I mean, Max Blumenthal's talking about it, and Do Dissidents is talking about it. In our sphere, everyone's going, wow, Caleb was right about the Years of Lead. And, well, I tend to be right about a lot of things. So, you know, I appreciate it.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I love it. You nailed this one. You did nail it. I mean, and, you know, it just, to piggyback what is taking place, Michigan Church, or not really church, it's Mormons, I guess, Book of Latter-day Saints, that gets attacked, 4 people killed. And you get, I'm trying to find the picture of the guy, basically a good old boy with a gun. This gentleman right here, I don't necessarily know his reasons. He was killed in the attack itself. He burned the church, apparently had IEDs in the car. This guy, he was a Marine. Don't know his motives yet. There was another gentleman, well, I call him a gentleman just for point of reference. This guy, he wanted to go and murder a pride parade as payback for Charlie Kirk. Apparently the right wing tends to bring up left wing violence, missing the point that their rhetoric also incentivizes people to behave in particular ways. And of course we had Charlie Kirk. And if I'm not mistaken, there was another one in Texas that just took place. Like, we get killings all the time, but these seem to be mass events where the entire point is to take a gun and go murder a lot of people for hashtag reasons. I think, and by the way, just one last point before I bring you in on this. Right here. This is what Donald Trump and his team recently put out, countering domestic terrorism and organized political violence. And, as we keep pointing out, Charlie Kirk, immediately after he was killed, somebody came up with the idea, we are going to use this as a 9/11 moment domestically, meaning we're going to use this as a political weapon and a political cudgel to go after our political opposition. And so they have now come up with executive orders. I know some people don't think the president has power, but executive order is a power to do something, where they're going after, quote unquote, Antifa, meaning they're taking action based on this stuff, sending military to various locations around the United States, particularly Democratic cities. This is being done on a fig leaf, like basically it's not real, and yet they're still using this and doing this. And I guess my sense is, especially if you're looking at social media, the argument that a lot of the people are making, especially on the right, don't seem to care about America. What they seem to care about is power. And so the thing is, yes, good job, throw those people in prison. Good job, go after the left, go after the political opposition, and even to the point of January 6th. But let's get to that part first. Give me your take on that, because it feels like the country is coming apart at the seams, and people who are screaming civil war and those type of things, it seems that that's driving. That's a narrative, but that narrative is not entirely without reality in the sense of the killings and shootings that are effectively taking place, many of which seem political in nature. Give me your thoughts.
Well, a couple things come to mind. One thing that I have pointed out is that Trump declaring Antifa to be a domestic terrorist organization, there is no such designation under U.S. law for a domestic terrorist organization. There is the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, which was passed by Bill Clinton, which has the State Department list foreign terrorist organizations. And it makes it a serious crime if you're an American to support one. That hits them with very, very heavy sanctions. But there is no designation for a domestic terrorism operation organization, right? In Britain, they do have that designation. And we saw recently a whole bunch of people get arrested for holding up signs saying they supported a group called Palestine Action. And that's, if you support, Palestine Action, this group in Britain that I guess has engaged in, they've gone into factories and places that are working with Israel and destroyed property or something because they've been declared to be a terrorist organization by the British government. It is illegal to hold up a sign that says, I support Palestine Action. Now, we don't have those kind of laws over here. So when Trump says he's declared them a domestic terrorist organization, it's this bum, 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 look what I did. It has no legal meaning whatsoever. And everyone's kind of playing along and no one's pointing this out. I find it weird, both the left and the right. The left are like, oh my God, he declared them a terrorist organization. And the right is like, he got him. He declared them a terrorist organization. It has no legal meaning, right? He might as well declare them Santa Claus or declare them, the Easter Bunny, or I don't know. The Tooth Fairy. It just doesn't mean anything. It's just a word. It's just, and seeing everyone play along. And you would think that the opposition would at least make fun of that and be like, that doesn't mean anything, but they won't, right? It's like they're all just kind of going along with it. I find that to be odd. The other thing is so the Mormon church, the LDS church that was recently shot up, right? Horrendous shooting, targeting this church. I just want to point this out. So, I am very interested in religion and different topics. And, the Mormon church is a very, very important church in the history of the United States, right? The state of Utah was founded. A complicated history. Originally, they were against slavery. They were an anti-slavery religion, and, they believed in polygamy. And then they moved out to Utah, and then they became very racist against the Native Americans. And it's got a whole complicated history. They didn't really become part of the American political establishment until the 1970s and 80s is really when they started really going into the CIA and the FBI, and suddenly they were part of the establishment. They were kind of considered fringe, but if you go to Idaho or Utah or Portland or Washington State or Seattle, or Oregon, they're a big deal. And I didn't, if you go out to the West, right, it's kind of a big deal and big influence on the culture, and they play board games, and there's different things about them that have kind of seeped into the culture. Kind of like, how people can be culturally Jewish, but they did, they don't practice Judaism. But
religious, right?
Yeah. And it's like, if you go out to the West, it's a really big part of the culture in places like Arizona and New Mexico and all that. Just kind of an interesting thing. So I've read about these things over the years, and I noticed, I watched one video on YouTube from this woman who is an ex-Mormon. She quit the Mormon church. She's mad at the Mormon church. I watched one video. My YouTube channel, my YouTube feed fills up now with videos by this one woman, and she's got hundreds of thousands of subscribers, and she's very good looking, and every video, I hate the Mormon church. They're a fraud. Joseph Smith was a con man. It's a big fraud. It's a con. And it's just this woman. And then the Wall Street Journal did a whole feature on her. The Mormon church is up against this, this YouTube channel that's exposing her. And she's got hundreds of thousands of subscribers. And she's got videos about everything you ever heard of about Mormonism and how it's bad. And, she goes after the Twilight movies because they were written by a Mormon. Did you know that?
What?
Yeah, right. And it's just everything, and it's just hate basically. And this woman, I'm sure she has some trauma. I'm sure she's got justifiable, anger at, I'm sure there's corruption there, and there's, dishonesty and hypocrisy like there is in every religion. And I'm not here to defend Salt Lake City and say the Mormon church is infallible, but there's this internet culture where it's like she's become internet famous. She's making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, bashing the religion and the community that she grew up in, saying it's a fraud, it's a fake, it's and then I see this shooting. Obviously she had nothing to do with this shooting, but it's like that's this mindset that it's like everything is as a con, everything's a fraud, everything's a scam, and I'm going to expose and tear things down, and I'm going to preach resentment and hate kind of. I think about a couple different literary analogies. One of them I think of Moby Dick, right? The classic novel. Right. Well, the plot of the novel is that there's this sea captain, Captain Ahab, who is a whaler. He hunts whales, and he was trying to kill this huge whale called Moby Dick, and he got crippled, right? For life. And so he spends his whole life obsessing with finding the white whale, finding Moby Dick, right? And the whole thing is that's the tragedy, right? He could go start a new business, go do something else, but he's so fixated on getting his revenge, right? It's like destroyed him, right? And then I see a lot of people on the internet that are like in white whale mode, right? They're fixated on destroying somebody or tearing somebody down, or, they're going to, and the internet really kind of cultivates people to get into a kind of a white whale mindset, right? Where there's not just fandom, they call anti-fandom. Right. Fandom is when you become obsessed with somebody, and that can be unhealthy. Right. We get all the beautiful women on the internet have stalkers who are obsessed with them and all of that. But anti-fandom is also dangerous, where it's like people find a celebrity or people find a religion or a political group or something they hate, and they just become obsessed with it. I'm going to destroy them. I'm going to, it's really, really unhealthy. Right. And that's a huge part of the internet. And like this YouTube channel that's been widely advertised is a Mormon anti-fandom YouTube channel, basically, about how Mormon church is evil, the Mormon church is a fraud, and I feel like this guy who shot up a community center or a church that associated with the Mormon church, it looks like he was somebody who had fallen into this mindset of anti-fandom. He was obsessively hating the Latter-day Saints. And look what happened. And then he turned into a murderer, right? And, and as much as he might have legitimate complaints about the religion, you don't have the right to go there and kill people. But if you fixate and you kind of collapse into this downward spiral of hatred, which the internet is so good at getting people to do, right? I see that. The other thing is there's an old episode of The Twilight Zone, right? Classic American television. You ever see The Twilight Zone?
Oh, I love it. I love it. Absolutely love it. Yeah.
One of the most famous episodes of The Twilight Zone is called To Serve Man. And I reference it a lot, right? And,
yes. Yes.
Yeah, what it's about is like these aliens.
My language, Caleb.
These aliens come to Earth, and they're really, really nice aliens, and they're giving everyone health care, and they cure cancer, and the human life expectancy doubles, and they're so amazing, and they just love the aliens, and they always ask the aliens, why do you do this? And they say, well, we have this book. It's called To Serve Man, and we just are following our book, To Serve Man. And so the people are like, great. And so they're going to start, taking them back to the home country. Right. And so all these people are lined up, and they're getting on the spaceship to go back to the home country. But this woman has been translating their book, To Serve Man. And she runs. And as the people are getting on the spaceship, she stops them and she says, To serve man, it's a cookbook. It's a cookbook. Right. And that's how the episode ends. Right. And that the whole reason that they were being so nice and, curing cancer and all of that is because they want to eat people. They're cannibals. Right. Or they're going to eat people to serve man. Right. It's a cookbook. And that's how our culture has really trained us to think everything's a cookbook. Right. If there's any community or any organization you might be part of, or any cause you might believe in, or any politician, it's a cookbook. It's a cookbook. Right. And that it's a way of like cultivating people to be not politically active, to not believe in things, to not have healthy relationships, and to just kind of be bitter and lonely on the internet, though. But then you get on the internet, right? And the internet is the one place where you're allowed to be. And it's like, it trains people to, it's hard. Think about dating. You're talking about dating and cheating and stuff like that. Being married, I'm married. I've been married for 11 years. It's hard. It's hard to be married. It's not easy, and it takes a commitment. You have to be committed to being married, right? It's hard to be in a political organization. It's hard to work with other people in any kind of sense. It's hard to start a business. It's hard to, and working with people is a difficult thing to do. And people let you down. People have their flaws. Things don't go as you would want, But if you cultivate people to just shout, it's a cookbook, and run away, right? Which is what the internet really kind of trains people to do. In every connection, right? Relationships. There's one of these rabbit holes. I watch one thing. I watched one video about what is narcissism. Suddenly my feed fills up with loads and loads of videos. My ex-boyfriend was a narcissist. There's this kind of narcissist. There's that kind of narcissist. You know how many people are sitting there seething on the internet? They had a breakup, or they got, divorced or whatever, and their ex was a narcissist, and they watch videos all day long about narcissism, and the narcissists are doing this and the narcissists are doing that. And it's like, that's how the internet is. It just gets you into this negative place. And the worse it gets, people get depressed, people get suicidal, people isolate, people don't have healthy relationships, or they become shooters. And I see, we can talk about the years of lead, and that's what my book is about, the years of lead and et cetera. But I see a lot of this violence as tied in with kind of this culture of anti-fandom, this culture of it's a cookbook, this downward spiral the internet gets people into. The incel thing, that's a classic thing, right? That's just a phase young men go through, right? When you're a young man, you can't get a girlfriend, you feel lonely, you feel like women don't like you. It's just kind of a normal part of being a young man growing up. Maybe if you're like ultra good looking from the time you're 5, you don't go through that phase. But most boys at some point in their teenage years, they go through that phase. But then they get over it, and it's always been there in the culture, right? The Phantom of the Opera, he's an incel, right? The whole thing is he's deformed, he's disabled, so he goes around killing women and setting traps, and he's an incel, right? And if you watch the musical Oklahoma, right? Judd Fry, the villain, is an incel. He has a whole song about he can't get a girlfriend, and he wishes he had a woman, and then he goes and tries to kill the hero. So it's always been there. There's always been guys who feel rejected by women or whatever and have resentment. That's just part of the thing. But now with the internet, if a young teenage boy feels that way, he can join an internet community of people that reinforce it, right? And he can develop a whole worldview about like women and it becomes like a whole part of his identity. Whereas before it was just kind of the phase he went through and got over. That's what makes the internet dangerous. So those are kind of my initial reactions, but we can talk more politically about the years of lead. But I just want to talk about the internet culture and how toxic it can be. But that's all. Go ahead.
No, that's a good point. No, that's a very good point. It breeds cynicism.
Yeah.
On some level, right? But it breeds cynicism in a way where I think people mistaken political ideology for cynicism. Meaning cynicism is not political ideology. Me assuming that the worst is always going to take place is not an analysis. That's me assuming the worst is going to take place. That's a broken clock, right? Mm-hmm. And even if it's true 50%, 80% of the time, that's still not political analysis. There's a difference in those things. But it's kind of driven by experience, environmental experience. And the internet, correct me if I'm wrong on this, if you disagree with this, is only reflecting that experience back at people in a way that allows them to build communities, even if the communities, as you point out, the incel thing. Well, okay, yes, it's a phase you go through in the 60s, but now it's a culture. And the culture comes together about how much we hate women because, they don't look at us, they look at the jocks. They don't want to deal with a good weirdo like me. They want to deal with these other people, and we're angry at women now, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you become a culture unto yourself. It's kind of strange, but it's just kind of the way the internet works and the way it brings people together in those ways. But isn't that stuff a reflection of the culture, just being reflected back at the public? It's almost like if you had a psychic society where people could read minds, but in a shallow way. Wouldn't that just be the internet? People put their thoughts out. People have Twitter, they have Facebook, they put a glossy image of themselves on Instagram. They associate in various groups of people who are like-minded, who thinks very similar things to they do, to the positive or to the negative. Isn't that our society? It's just what it means to be a person in this particular society, and have that being push back at you over and over and over again, a hard and that particular point of view about this is what the world is. Mind you, you're choosing it on some level, but it's what the internet does. Give me a take on that, or do you disagree with that?
Well, I'll point this out is, you know, when I was a kid, my parents would often say to me, be positive. And I would be resentful of that. I'd say, I can be however I want. If I'm feeling bad, I can be negative or whatever.
Right.
But there used to be a social obligation to keep a positive attitude for the sake of the other people, right? Because if you're around somebody who's feeling bad, you're likely to feel bad, right? And that, you know, your feelings, you know, we human beings are collective in nature, right? And the way we interact with people, it affects us, right? The way people react to us is the way we judge ourselves, that everything human beings do is collective. And so there was this feeling that it was your obligation to be positive for the other people around you in your life, right? And it's interesting, if the people around you are positive, it's easier for you to be positive. Yes. And if you are positive, it's easier for the people around you to be positive. And there was like this feeling that, like, for the sake of everybody, we're going to try to be positive. And there's something to that. And we've kind of gotten away from that, right? And the internet gives everyone permission and the ability to not be positive, but to be very, very negative, and to feed everyone else's negativity. That's kind of what I see going on here. Again, it's an element of, I don't think it's a big conspiracy. Like you said, it's that, you know, this is just kind of the internet brings this out in people. But there's an element of like crass marketing in it, right? Is that, you know, people have pent up emotions, people have negative feelings, and the internet is a place that they can vent them. You know, I mean, the internet is, I mean, it's kind of like pornography, right? You can't be sexual all the time, right? But the internet, you're just there with your computer. You can be sexual all day long, right? And it's very similar to that, right? It's, you know, and that, you know, the internet is a place where it's just you and your computer and the whole world, but not exactly. They're not in the room with you, right? And so all the negative emotions, negative thoughts that you might police when you're around other people and social interactions, you can just let them all out on the internet.
I see.
Yeah.
See.
And
I guess I'm trying to say, though, that society underlies that. Like, meaning, if you are having a difficult time financially, let's take the internet out for a moment. If you are, let's say, in California, and you see 300,000 homeless people laying on the street, the government doesn't care.
Right.
How does it make you feel about your government or your society?
Yeah.
Or if you're seeing crime where people are raiding a store and stealing all of these things out of the store, homeless people living on the streets. Like, meaning, if you are looking at your world, and in your world, you're like, they don't care. I know they don't care. There's nothing in me that tells me that these people care. That gives you a take. And so it's like the take will come out to be brutal, but that brutality is not necessarily untethered to the real world. I'll give you another example. Doctors. I'm not a big fan of doctors. When I was, in the same way that woman talks about the Mormon church on the internet,
yeah,
I've had horrible experiences with doctors that have given me a very brutal take on the way medicine is done, especially in the United States, and especially, let's say, to people of color. That's my take. That take is driven from experience. And I'm saying, when those experiences come online, I'll give you another one, rap. Like, people used to be like, oh, this gangster rap and the horrible things they're saying. It's like, these guys in the very beginning were living on the streets. They were selling drugs. They could see women prostituting. They have broken homes. They are reflecting their experiences. All of this stuff is coming from an environmental outcome. Like, if people were living in utopia, they wouldn't have an internet where you have Nazis and all of this other stuff on. And I'm using utopia as an extreme. But I'm trying to point out that, isn't the internet just a reflection of the individual experiences that people are dealing with in their societal life being reflected into, I don't know, a condensed version online where you can get it very specific, whereas in life it's more diffuse?
Indeed, but it's not offering solutions, right? It's allowing people to just kind of stew in their negativity, and that's the issue. I mean, obviously, yes, that negativity wouldn't be there if there weren't things to actually complain about, right? But you don't want to get into that place of just complaining, right? Ultimately, the way you solve problems is by forming organizations, people coming together and putting forward solutions and demanding them. And that the internet very much has a culture where people don't do that, right? And that's kind of what inspired me to write the book about the American Years of Lead, right? Is that when Luigi Mangione allegedly, I mean, we don't know, and I have questions about his guilt, but when the killing of Brian Thompson, the United Healthcare CEO, happened, immediately there were all these people all over the internet, all over social media, cheering him as a hero for doing it and saying this was absolutely awesome. And I immediately thought of the Medicare for All marches and Force the Vote, and how when people were actually marching in the streets demanding Medicare for all, it was, oh, this is unacceptable. And, you know, oh, there was one Nazi who went to one rally and, oh, we can't do that. You know, so that was unacceptable. And Jimmy Dore was pushing a parliamentary procedure around Nancy Pelosi. Oh, my God, how dare he, and all this. And then the very same people that were just completely opposed to the Medicare for All marches and completely opposed to the Force the Vote proceedings, suddenly this guy just murdering somebody on the streets, that's amazing, that's awesome, and we should all just cheer for it. And I'm like, something's off here. Something's very, very off here. You know, why is a random act of murder or lone wolf killing acceptable, but a mass movement isn't? And I looked into this, and I've seen the internet culture of anti-fandom, and I've seen how the organizations that do emerge, get kind of torn apart. And, I argued that this was an intelligence operation, and that this was basically a plan by the establishment to win by default, right? If there's all kinds of senseless political violence, the population gets weary and demoralized, and the status quo continues. And that's what happened in Italy in the 60s and 70s. There was a moment where the far right, or the right wing, the Christian Democrats, wanted to leave NATO. The Communist Party wanted to leave NATO. And the public was overwhelmingly opposed to NATO. And the CIA fomented Operation Gladio, which was funding fascist groups to kill communists, funding communist groups to kill fascists, and then communist groups to kill other communist groups, and fascist groups to kill other fascists. And it was being fomented by American intelligence, and the population wanted to leave NATO, but they were kind of overruled because there was just all this crazy political violence, and the population became weary. And as a result, Italy remained in NATO. And, the kidnapping of Aldo Moro was kind of like the ultimate moment. So Aldo Moro was the leader of the Christian Democrat Party, and he wanted to form a coalition government with the Communist Party that would oppose NATO and would also focus on reindustrialization of Italy, like, economic protectionism, kind of to bring industries back and such. And he was in talks with the Communist Party. So then the Red Brigades, which were this like communist, like Maoist breakaway from the Communist Party, that was very violent, they kidnapped Aldo Moro. And they held him for a couple months, and then they killed him. And they left his body halfway between the Communist Party headquarters and the Christian Democrat Party headquarters to make a statement. And it was later revealed, there was a journalist who revealed that top leaders in the Italian government knew where Aldo Moro, the head of the Christian Democratic Party, was being held, and didn't rescue him. Because they were waiting for permission from somebody. And it was a pretty horrendous incident. But it was to send a message: you can't form a coalition government. And that, there would have been a left-right alliance. The far left, the Communist Party, and the right wing, the Christian Democrats, wanted to form a coalition government to actually get something done, to leave NATO and to economically develop Italy. And that just wasn't going to be permitted. And the Years of Lead, Operation Gladio. Later, it was revealed that there was something called the P2 Masonic Lodge, which was, I guess, the CIA had set up this, and used Freemasonry and set up kind of a secret society of people that were going to keep Italy and NATO. And they recruited people from the far left and the far right and all kinds of groups to join this kind of secret society. And that the CIA had put like secret, weapons, depositories all across the country in case Italy was ever invaded by the Soviet Union or whatever, and that the Red Brigades and the fascist groups were actually using some of the guns and weapons the CIA had left in the country in these like secret, hiding places. And the whole thing was an operation, and it was a successful operation that kept Italy in NATO. And Jamaica is a similar story. In the 70s in Jamaica, they elected a guy named Michael Manley, who was a friend of Fidel Castro, and he wanted to move Jamaica towards socialism. And then there was all kinds of intense, crazy gang violence. There was a gang called Shower Posse, they were called, the shower posse, and they supported the Labor Party, which was the party that was aligned with the United States, and the People's Party or the Popular National People's Party or something like that. They were the socialist group that was backing Michael Manley. They had gangs that were supporting them, and there was just intense, crazy gang violence. Bob Marley went down there and did his One Love concert and had the two party leaders kind of shake hands and try to oppose political violence, but it didn't help, and there was just so much killing, and eventually Michael Manley left office, and they didn't move the country towards socialism. Jamaica didn't become an anti-imperialist country. And then later, this shower posse gang, the USA sent troops to Jamaica, or at least law enforcement, and there was like a big, shootout. And the leader of the shower posse gang is now in federal prison in the United States. And what's crazy is he was trained by the CIA. It's revealed they actually trained him and his whole group to go down to Jamaica to foment all the political violence. But he became such a big drug dealer and all of that in the early 2000s. The USA had to then go into Jamaica and take him out. And now he's sitting in a federal prison. It's really a crazy story. There was even a massacre in New Jersey. There was a Jamaican American community festival in New Jersey that happened. And the shower posse gang showed up, and there was a shootout, and people were killed in New Jersey. Like the political violence the U.S. government fomented in New Jersey spilled into the United States in the 1980s. I mean, it's a really crazy story. So you look at all of that. I mean, there's many other examples you can give, but this is how counterinsurgency is waged. And this is what I wrote about in the book, right? If you read, Frank Kitson, who was the top British intelligence officer, if you read William S. Lind, who was the Pentagon strategist, who, he was kind of the mind behind the surge in Iraq. He wrote the Handbook of Fourth Generation Warfare. The way you fight an insurgency is you make it confusing as hell. You make it so no one knows who's on what side. You make it so the insurgents are fighting other insurgents. They're not fighting the state. And that's how, and then the status quo just kind of wins by default. And that's the strategy that is used. And if you read, William S. Lind's Handbook of Fourth Generation Warfare, I mean, William S. Lind was a Pentagon strategist who engineered the surge in Iraq. He said, look, for 7,000 years, people have been telling the story of David and Goliath. Has anyone ever sympathized with Goliath in the story? No. And he said the reason that armies lose in insurgencies is because they're perceived as Goliath and the population is viewed as David. And so what you have to do in order to defeat an insurgency is you have to confuse the population so they don't see it as David and Goliath. Make it so there's 5 different Davids fighting each other and no one can tell who's who. And Goliath is just kind of standing back and saying, look, guys, we don't want any violence here. And people will run to Goliath for protection then as the Davids are shooting at each other and they don't know what's going on. That's the strategy that they tend to use in order to control insurgencies. And Frank Kitson wrote about this. He's the one who oversaw the British operations against the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya. The Mau Mau Land and Freedom Army was fighting the British Empire in India. And the way that they controlled it is they set up what they called counter gangs. And it was people that were former Mau Mau fighters that were captured, and they were then turned into, fake Mau Mau fighters. And they would go into the countryside and they would commit atrocities that would be blamed on the Mau Mau. They would go and gather intelligence about who the Mau Mau were and all of that. And it got to the point that the Kenyan population couldn't tell who the real resistance fighters were and who these other people were. And on top of that, they started rounding up the men and putting them in like little prison camps that they set up, right? And the British, it was a really awful, the counterinsurgency in Kenya in the 1950s. It was a horrendous crime against humanity. There's a book called Imperial Reckoning that kind of goes over the history of it. But as a result of, this, counter gang manipulation of the insurgency and also just rounding up all the men in certain areas and putting them in like little concentration camps, the British were able to defeat the insurgency in Kenya that had widespread popular support. And then a few years later, Kenya became independent, but it was with a puppet, right? They were not really independent. It was somebody the British picked. They said, now you're independent, but they're part of the British Commonwealth, right? Right. That's the kind of the game that's played, right? And it's kind of an interesting history there. And that the term counter gangs was used, and that Frank Kitson developed that strategy of developing counter gangs, and he used it against the IRA in Northern Ireland. He realized that the IRA had the support of the population. So instead of having the British Army go out and fight the IRA, they had Protestant gangs fight the IRA. And the British government was giving guns and weapons to Protestant groups to fight the IRA, which tended to be supported by the Catholics. And then at that point, it's not the British Army, the mighty British Empire fighting the Irish people. No, it's an ethnic thing. And, why can't we all just get along, Protestants and Catholics? And then you have the Vatican sponsoring these peace marches. And then on top of that, drug dealers began targeting the IRA. And so as drug dealers are shooting the IRA with, getting promoted by the British government to do that, the IRA then has to join with other drug dealers to protect them. And suddenly the IRA is involved in organized crime, which organized crime is a messy, ugly thing, right? And the IRA is like, in order to basically get protection from one group of drug dealers, they have to allow drug dealers to go through the neighborhoods where they control it. And the IRA is suddenly involved in organized crime, and organized crime is a really messy, ugly business that has nothing to do with right and wrong and justice. It's just and so the IRA gets mixed up in organized crime, and the Protestant groups are carrying out their atrocities and killing people. Then there's breakaway groups from the IRA that form, of IRA fighters who think the real IRA is sellout and phony, so they're killing IRA people, or they're carrying out bombings that are then blamed on the IRA. And it gets so confusing. In the 80s and 90s, everyone in Northern Ireland is just kind of tired of it. And ultimately they signed the Good Friday Agreement. And now, Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. And everyone was just so tired of the killing and the violence, and no one knew what it was about. This is how you wage an effective counterinsurgency. And creating senseless political violence, that is a big part of it. And that's what I maintain. That's the psyop going on right now. The American people are tired of the wars. The American people are tired of our economy getting worse. The American people want their freedoms to be protected. And so rather than coming together and forming some kind of united government like Aldo Moro was trying to do in Italy that would actually advance that, instead, we have all this senseless political violence. So the status quo just kind of wins by default.
Wow. That's grim. That's extremely grim. I mean, because when you think about that, how do you get around that?
Well,
it's an
we have to
effective
call
strategy.
it what it is. We have to call it what it is and say, this is what they're trying to do. And we have to make a conscious decision not to promote political violence. And we have to put forward a program that actually will fix the country. That's what we've done with CPI. We have 4 points, public ownership of our natural resources, a national bank, mobilize the public to start rebuilding the country, right? And have a mass jobs program to just rebuild America, new high-speed railway, et cetera, kind of like the Works Progress Administration of Roosevelt. And then on top of that, invest in our population, start providing healthcare and jobs. It's a 4-point plan, right? And you put forward solutions that people can see actually implemented, and you agitate and say, why don't we have these things? And you build a movement demanding these real solutions. This is one thing I'll point out, right? That 4-point plan we have, very simple 4-point plan, that is what you call a transitional program. And that if you look at serious revolutionary movements in history, they have a transitional program. They have certain things that they want to implement that only they can put forward, and they kind of mobilize people for those things that they want. But I've noticed that fraudulent organizations, the communist groups in America, none of them have a transitional program. They have what you call a minimum maximum program, right? Which is they have the maximum program, which is crazy shit that doesn't even make sense. I read it, it's like, their maximum program is, we're going to have a government that stands for the downtrodden. And what does that mean? That doesn't even mean anything. I mean, one of these socialist groups, I was looking at their manifesto. I thought after the revolution, they're going to have a magic wand. They're just going to go around, bing, they're going to make things disappear. We will abolish landlordism. Bing, what does that mean? How are you going to abolish landlordism? Are you going to nationalize all apartment buildings? Are you going to kick everyone out? Are people going to de facto own the building?
Yeah.
Explain what that means. They're going to abolish racism. What does that mean? How do you abolish, they're just going to go around, bing, bing, everything's just going to so they have a crazy maximum program. It doesn't even make any sense, right? It's just, it's like this super revolutionary thing. And then it's mixed in with the minimum program, which is just whatever the Democrats are already doing, like stuff that's already in the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris platform. Yeah. And what that is if a group is doing that, if they have a minimum maximum program, what that is they're just recruiting a group of fanatics to work for Joe Biden. That's what they're doing, right? And the maximum program stuff is there to give you the feeling that you're radical, that you're fighting the system. You're really just working for the minimum program. You're really just foot soldiers of Joe Biden. That's what's going on. But a transitional program, that's a serious thing. If you put forward, hey, we could do this, why are we not doing this? Like we have put forward the Bering Sea Bridge, the peace bridge over the Bering Sea. Why is it that with us being right so close to the Russian Far East, where all this economic growth is going on, why don't we build a bridge connecting Alaska to Russia, right? And why don't we build the peace bridge so that America can get in on the economic development that's happening in Asia right now? That's a transitional program. That's something that could really happen. But it's not happening because our leaders are too tied in with Wall Street and the imperialists. So we're going around demanding something that could actually happen. And people are getting involved and people are saying, well, why are we not doing this? Oh, it's because our government's controlled by the rich and powerful. It's because of imperialism. That's how real revolutionaries tend to organize, is they have a transitional program. So that's how we fight against the years of lead. You need to put forward a transitional program. We need to reject political violence.
But you firmly believe that that's what's taking place now. Wait, do you believe that the CIA is involved in getting people killed? Or do you believe that environmental circumstances are pushing people into this kind of...
I believe that there is a conscious effort going on to get people demoralized and get people sectarian. And I think that what Operation Gladio was in Italy is now happening in America. I believe that. It looks to me like that is the case, because when mainstream media outlets are celebrating the murder of a CEO, right? Yet, a peaceful movement for demanding healthcare is viewed as, an unforgivable crime. Something's off. Something's off. And that makes me think that, again, this is how the establishment in America wants to win by default, is by having the opposition from every side be confused and fighting itself and violent. And also, you have to be real. Trauma, right? Trauma is a very effective mechanism for preventing people from working together. I know a lot of old communists who are really heroic people who've made a lot of great sacrifices, but they have Trump derangement syndrome. And where does that Trump derangement syndrome come from? It comes from the fact that they were marching against the Vietnam War and they were protesting in the 80s, and people with American flags and people with crosses and conservatives got into fistfights with them and injured them. And, when there's a body count, when people can recall, friends of theirs being killed and all of that, it's very hard to then talk to people about, okay, well, we need to have unity. It's very hard because there's trauma there, right? When there's a body count, when people have been killed and all of that, I think about someone I was very, very close to during the 2012 election, an older man who was kind of a mentor to me, who I learned so much from. But on the 2012 election night, Mitt Romney lost, Obama won. I was on the phone with him. And I remember he was saying, how could all these people vote for Mitt Romney? And I remember saying, well, I mean, they voted for Obama too. And look what Obama did to Libya. As far as I was concerned, voting for Obama and voting for Mitt Romney were both wrong. But in his mind, people voting for Mitt Romney was just this unforgivable crime. And this just anger came out in his voice. Everyone who voted for Mitt Romney, these people have a hole in their head. Someone should just kill them. The anger coming up. But that was the anger of, look, I mean, he was a white guy who grew up in the South. In South Carolina, when Jim Crow was a reality, and his family, their identity was, we are not racist, we are against segregation. And his identity was very much caught up with, I'm not like those conservative, evil people. I'm a good white person, right? And the trauma and the violence, and I mean, the history there, for him, the idea that anyone might vote for Mitt Romney for any reason other than they're a bad person, he just wasn't going to hear it, right? And for him, voting for Obama was just 1,000 times better. Even if Obama did a lot of bad things, he had this kind of this trauma had been created that was going to prevent him from seeing things clearly, right? And that in Latin America, I don't think Latin America, I mean, Venezuela is a great country and they're moving towards socialism, Nicaragua, but a lot of Latin America is kind of trapped because the nationalist military right wing of Latin America that the USA used to support, the USA has kind of pulled the carpet from under them, no longer supports them. And the actual anti-imperialists, the actual like Marxists and all of that, they will never work together because they've killed each other. There's been wars in which hundreds of thousands of people have died. People have been kidnapped. People have been tortured. They're never going to work together. And the way Latin America needs to move forward is the nationalist right wing, the WACL people, the World Anti-Communist League, and the legit anti-imperialists need to come together. They're not going to, because they've killed each other, because there's a body count, because there were death squads, because there were insurgencies, they were kidnapping. They're never going to work together. And, for a while, it looked like Bolivarianism was on the march, but then you know, but then as the USA pivoted away from supporting the right wing, the classical nationalist right wing of Latin America, and pivoted instead to supporting this kind of new left, right? They kind of fomented a George Soros new left in Latin America. At that point, you know, that was the maneuver that needed to happen. And the USA, I think Latin America, it's going to take a generation or so for that trauma to go away, right? But ultimately, the forces in Latin America that want the countries to become wealthier and not dominated by imperialism, on the one hand, you have the military right wing, and on the other hand, you have the actual communists, and they're never going to work together. There's a river of blood that's been drawn between them, and the USA is supporting this kind of phony liberal left that they created with George Soros that maintains the status quo. And that's part of this years of lead stuff too. I believe that not only was the killing of Charlie Kirk, you know, something that was obviously very, very traumatizing, but the way then all these people on social media were celebrating it, and the way that was just pounded into the heads of all these conservative people. Look, one of you got killed in this brutal, horrendous way, a horrendous video, and now there's all these people celebrating it. They want to kill you. They want to kill your family. They want to kill your relatives. They're coming for you. And of course, are they ever going to work with any leftist person then? Of course not, right? They're thinking of all these people that were cheering as someone they admired got killed, and they're traumatized by that, right?
Yeah.
And, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. No, please finish. Please finish.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, that's an operation, is this trauma, right? Getting people to believe they're in danger, that their lives are in danger, getting people to believe other people just want to kill them. You know, that is a way of controlling people, and making sure they won't form the alliances that might come down the road, right? And that's, you know, I had so many people who came to me after the killing of Charlie Kirk, and they said, well, it's okay for me to celebrate it, Caleb, because Charlie Kirk is an actual fascist and you're not. And I said, you know, I've been canceled by the far left, and they can't tell the difference between me and Charlie Kirk, even though I've been doing, you know, anti-racist and civil rights and demonstrations my whole life against war, and you know, and all of that. I got canceled by the far left, and it just became common knowledge that I'm a white supremacist and that I'm a neo-Nazi and I'm all these awful things. I'm not, you know, but and that there's all kinds of people all over the internet that couldn't tell the difference between me and Charlie Kirk. And I was like, I'm telling you, this is very, very dangerous, right? And the way that the left, you know, I mean, and I said, you shouldn't be celebrating the murder of Charlie Kirk, because you shouldn't be killing people for their political views. He was wrong about a lot of things, and there's very little that I agree with him on, but I was sickened by the people celebrating it. And that when you do that, when you celebrate it, you're sending a message to all the people who liked him that I am your enemy. I want to harm you, and that if down the road you start to agree with me on an issue, we shouldn't work together because I'm somebody that wants to hurt you. That's basically what you're saying, you know, and that, you know, you shouldn't, that's just not a good message to put out there. It's a very negative, hateful message, you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And I agree with your overall wants. I just want to point that out there. I want to make that very strong. Your overall wants, I agree with. I think people are responding to environmental circumstances. And when the left, for example, when Charlie Kirk was killed, agreed. There were some people that actually was out celebrating his death. Agreed. But the issue that I saw more than anything else, and maybe this is my disposition in the world, you know, sitting on the moon looking at events through a straw, was that the right immediately seemed almost gleeful that Kirk was dead, and started to immediately make this political case that he's some kind of saint. He's with Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. He's a civil rights figure. You get Trump and all of these other people basically at the memorial service, meaning they tried to fashion him into something that he obviously wasn't, which by definition is going to create political opposition. Like, it's one thing if you say, oh my God, I can't believe they killed Charlie Kirk. Okay, fair enough. Then to turn around and immediately say, Charlie Kirk was a civil rights icon. We should have a day named after Charlie Kirk. There should be a monument after Charlie Kirk. There should be this and that. All of that's political. All of it is political. And the moment that you create death and make that death a political event, then you will get chaos. You don't need anybody else to push that. Just the very act of you trying to say to somebody who half the country, or at the very least half the people that know him, consider him flagrantly racist, and saying this is a civil rights icon, it's offensive on its face. Showing a picture of Charlie Kirk shaking hands with Malcolm X is grotesque.
Well, and that's the
certainly
thing.
People I'm going to
No
say
one can
something.
say what you're saying, because immediately, the second you say what you say, immediately somebody flashes an image in their head of somebody celebrating the murder, and they think you're one of those people then, because you're just saying what you said right there. And that's not what you're saying. You're not celebrating the murder. You're just saying,
I'm not
look, we
celebrating his
shouldn't be
murder. I thought it
equating
was
this
cool.
guy with civil rights activists and all of that, because he was just a conservative guy who went to college campuses. But they create this kind of like dual thinking where then you can't speak clearly about things. You know what I'm saying? Right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, right? I'm sure there are people watching this right now that heard you say what you said, which I agree with. He wasn't a civil rights icon. He was just a conservative campus guy. Right. But they heard you saying that, and they immediately flashed in their head that image of somebody dancing around and celebrating it. And now they think you're the enemy. Right. And that's what trauma does. Right. And that you can't have a rational conversation. It suddenly becomes you're with our team or you're with their team. Right. And you're not on either team. You're just saying, like, let's be real. Charlie Kirk was a Republican college activist. Right.
Yeah.
And the trauma then creates a moment where people can't hear you say that. Right. And that's why trauma is dangerous. Right. Is that we can't speak clearly about things. Right.
It also goes beyond that, though. Again, I agree with your wants, but there needs to be honest political reflection about who you're dealing with. Meaning there are some, like, for example, to give you a perfect example, do you remember when Sanders was running in the Democratic primary?
Yes.
And up to that point, when third wave Democrats were effectively, Bill Clintons of the world and all these people, they would say the left is united. Yes, we don't have your entire political wants from the standpoint of the real left, but we do have some of them. And so you're close to us politically than Republicans. So you should vote for us because we are together as a political party. Now, that's the argument that they would effectively make to the left, giving the soothing point of view that we are working together. Okay, the moment that Sanders gets into a pole position where all of the energy is effectively with him, what do? That flips on a dime. And it becomes, the reality of it becomes clear. We're not on the same team. We're not pushing for the same things. Yes, we gave you an argument to make you think we are together while you were in the laggard position to keep you soothing argument. But the moment that you became in somewhat of a pole position, we're in a rules-based order world, and we need to do everything in our power to put a knife in you. And look at what the U.S. does, right? The U.S. goes around the globe. You can say in the 70s and the 80s and the 60s, hey, we believe in freedom and democracy. We believe in free trade. We believe in all of these things. The moment that they lose, let's say, capability to China, where China's a threat, this is a rules-based order. This is not international law. We don't really believe in this stuff. We believed in this stuff when you were in a laggard's position. I'm saying the same thing is true in our current political environment. I strongly believe and will make the argument that we're not all playing on the same team. We're not all playing on the same sides. If I look at an event that takes place, I will be honest about that event, whether I think that event's cut left or right. When they were going after Trump, I would say, this is nonsense. Hush money payment to a porn star is insane. By the same token, when Donald Trump tried to overthrow the government, I would say Donald Trump should be put in a cage. I don't like either side. So I don't necessarily have an overt bias in this stuff. I just try to be honest about, as I tell my audience all the time, to their chagrin, sometimes my job is to just be honest. Not everybody does that. You may have some conservatives who would look at the world and say, well, obviously Donald Trump can't stay in a third term, or obviously Donald Trump lost the race. But not all of them do that. Not all of them believe in the same ideals. And because all of them don't believe in the same ideals, what you get is some people just believe in power. It's not about right or wrong. It's not about us working together. It's about you losing and us taking power. And if that means we can be king for 20 years, then damn it, we could be king for 20 years. I'm saying that you have people in your society that firmly believe that, or are not in this mindset that you're in about, let's be kumbaya.
Well,
tell me if you think I'm wrong.
Well, it's the issue of false polarization versus the polarization that we actually need. The false polarization is woke versus MAGA. It's red team versus blue team. And in that false polarization, yeah, we should vote for Kamala Harris because she's closer to Bernie Sanders, and the Trump people are just the main threat. And that false polarization leads people to vote for what they don't want. Because we're on this side, and so but we need a real polarization around demanding defense of our freedoms, demanding an end to these wars, and demanding economic justice and building up the country. And if we could really polarize around those issues, that would be some left-right unity that would break the false polarization, right? And that wouldn't be, well, we have to vote for Kamala because she's different. It would be an actual real polarization where, I could see, forces that are opposed to the U.S. establishment and the way it's bankrupting and impoverishing the country and taking us into wars and taking away our freedom, coming together on that basis, right? That could be a real polarization, real opposition. And it would face a real solid opposition from the establishment, you can be sure. But it would polarize the country against the establishment. That's what's needed. Yeah.
Agreed. Like I said, I agree with your wants and I agree with the ends that you're trying to accomplish. My bias is to kind of, we should be working together for this better world. I don't know, man, but I've been disillusioned by some of this stuff. Like just seeing some of the comments that people make after, I've been disillusioned with the stuff. I was far more kumbayash when I was younger. And after watching US policy, it gives you a point of view of the world. It's a more honest, realist. Okay, not everybody believes the same thing that you do. Not everybody is going to be honest about political situations. People will lie based on their biases. People will make shit up to get from point A to point B. It's not about, a democratic order. It's not about putting America first. It's about how do we win? And that is a dangerous place to be in. So, Caleb, I agree with you. Don't, please finish. Last comment. Last word.
Oh, no. Hey, if people want to check out my work, my organization, Center for Political Innovation, cpiusa.org. We're doing great stuff. We're got a National Day of Action coming up October 4th to support more peace talks with Russia. And we're doing great stuff. So, and you're doing great stuff as well, Jamarl. It's always a pleasure to be on your channel. So thank you for inviting me on. And
it is always a pleasure to have you, man. And like I said, I learn from you every time you come on. I swear to God, your breadth of knowledge is just fantastic. I think I tell the audience every time that I'm always impressed by your breadth of knowledge on this stuff. So definitely check out Caleb's books. Definitely check out Center for Political Innovation. Again, I want to nail down, I love your wants. And Lord knows, I agree with you in regards to, look, real polarization is a good thing. That I can accept, right? Like if I feel like, okay, we're fighting for something, that I get. But maybe you're right. Maybe this is just chaos for the sake of chaos, just for people to fall down to their camps and saying, okay, nothing can be done. This is just the way it is. Nothing is real. Everything is fake. All of these people are actors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, all right. Caleb, you are fantastic.
Thank you.
Continue to be fantastic. Thank you, man. Have a good day, okay?
You
be safe. All right. Caleb Maupin, always love Caleb. Caleb is a fantastic guest. He really is. Like I said, his breadth of knowledge is just great. No Americans care about organizations like Caleb's. Oh, that's bad, Fei Lu. But they should. Like, be honest with me. If you had the potential to get behind a real life campaign, and I mean real life, I don't mean this, they say what they need to say to get from point A to point B, but a real life campaign of, we need to stop these wars. We need ownership of public utilities, basically kind of like China in this case. Meaning you have three core issues, and you have effectively asserted our entire political existence about these three core issues. If you want to ask us about other stuff, fair enough, but our job, and we will die on the flag to do it, is to get these three core issues accomplished. That's different than your current political environment. I don't think Caleb wrong on that. I actually think he's right on that. The trick is how do you do it? And Lord knows I have no idea. By the way, in the Venus Project, Jack Fresco, do you remember Zeitgeist films 1, 2, and 3? Zeitgeist is based off of the Venus Project by Jack Fresco, where he has this idea of revamping the world into this, what do they call it? It's not based on scarcity, it's post-scarcity, using technology to effectively redefine the way our world operates. If you ask Jack Fresco has topics on everything. The man is brilliant. If you say, how do you do it? Just Just ask him one question. All of this is great. I love the homes. I love what your ideas are. I love this. This is great. It's like a new Buckminster Fuller. How do you do it? And Fresco, who is normally a chatterbox, can explain all sorts of stuff. He has some ideas that go, I think, a bit too far, but whatever. He has no answer for that. He has no answer. And by the way, Star Trek has no answer for that. The answer that Star Trek came up with is there's a third world war and there's another war after that. Meaning the entire playing board has just been wiped clean. And it has been so disastrous. It's so radically bad, even to the point of destroying the world's environment, meaning the world is on the brink of environmental collapse, that humanity had to change. That's fucking cynical, if you think about it. For a show that often seems love and light, these do-gooders going around the world, and yes, some of that is propaganda, fair enough, right? It's like if your military talked about itself. We're doing justice and freedom around the globe and blah, blah, blah. But let's take them at their word for it. It took almost the end of human civilization to change, or let's say for human beings to grow up. Yeah, I don't know how do you get from point A to point B. Look at what they're doing now. They're about to sleepwalk into a third world war. And think about what that means. And what you're going to get, inevitably, is conventional war has escalated. And talk starts to come up of getting closer and closer to, are you going to push the button to end the world? And somebody's either going to say yay or nay. That's terrifying. But that is where we're headed. That is where we're headed. I think Mark described it right. Two cars rushing to the end of a cliff. One thinking that the other one is going to stop. But the guy who's in one car thinks, well, the guy's always pull back. So the guy's not. He's going to totally pull back. You get closer and closer to the cliff. He'll totally pull back. I know he's going to pull back. You get closer and closer to the cliff. You're going off the cliff. Yeah, we sleepwalk into a nuclear war. Yeah. Nuclear brinksmanship. But see, I don't think it's brinksmanship. Like, how do you back away at that point? It's not like you have John F. Kennedy, who can make deals and make plans in order to come up with some kind of new arrangement. You have Donald Trump. Trump is incompetent. And because he's incompetent, the ability to wield political clout, political power, all of that stuff is lost upon him. Like, you know, if you have millions of people that are backing you politically, then by definition, you have power. And I don't mean this from previous conversations. I'm saying this in the sense of you have a large mass of human beings that you can say, well, I mean, the crowd obviously agrees with me on this, not in this kind of fake way that Donald Trump does, but in a real, tangible sense. Does Trump know how to do that? Does he know how to use that? Up to this point, the only thing he's known how to do is to basically bully and act like a child. That's not indicative of somebody who seems to have the capability of not taking the world over a cliff. The guy doesn't even read his policy briefs. So there's that. Yeah, I don't mean to be a ball of joy, but we're not in a good place. Let's see, Red Dye 40. I'm feeling guilty as he speaks. Anyone else? Feeling guilty? Oh, you mean Caleb? You mean Caleb? Fortunately, I didn't celebrate Charlie Kirk's death. Fortunately, I did not. I was very aggressive in pointing out, you guys are celebrating a racist. What the fuck is wrong with you? But I never celebrated his death. And don't get me wrong, there are people who, when they drop dead, I will dance on their graves. The Charlie Kirk thing was weirder because that could be me. That could be any random YouTuber that you watch. That could be any of us. And of course, you know, it was kind of awkward for somebody to then come on after the fact and be like, well, that was the life he lived. But that's not the life he lived. Meaning you didn't live the life as a YouTuber or as somebody who goes to college campuses or running an organization. Yes, obviously I think he's a degenerate. But I don't think in his mind he was thinking, I am taking this political tact that may get me killed. I don't know if any of us, well, I thought that, but not in earnest. Like it was just, it just kind of crosses your mind. When you get fired from a job because you have a certain political disposition, then you realize media is not separate from politics. They're fused at the hip. There is no neutral media. Media has a point of view. If you are neutral in the middle of a genocide, let me tell you something, you're not neutral. You're effectively allowing and egging on the genocide just based on your neutrality. There is no space where you can just sit and say, well, this is my neutral position. It doesn't exist. Any point of view is going to cut a particular way. Even if you try to both sides the issue, that cuts a particular way, especially if you're both sides are bullshit. If two little boys get into a fight, you come and you say, I'm going to punish both. And it's like, yeah, but he slapped my sister and kicked me in the balls. How are you punishing both of us? He was obviously at fault. Punishing both fucks over the one who didn't do anything. There is no neutrality in this process. I hope you get my point. Sitting on the moon looking at events. I say it all the time, but obviously I have a certain point of view, and that point of view is going to be espoused in what I'm saying. I try to be as honest as possible, but you still get the point of view. So, no, I didn't celebrate his death. I don't think people should celebrate his death. I even felt dodgy about this idea of what this was the life he lived. I even felt dodgy about that. I take more issue, honestly, and I think I've been very clear. Charlie Kirk shouldn't have been murdered, obviously. I take more issue with the right using it as a political cudgel, or for that matter, trying to fashion him into something that doesn't exist. By the way, they're doing the same thing with January 6th. They're trying to say, well, the federal government was responsible for January 6th. No, motherfucker. No. People running through the Capitol screaming, Trump, Trump, Trump. Nobody told them to do that. They chose to do that. People who are out there beating the hell out of cops and putting them in the hospital. Nobody told them to do that. They chose to do that. It was assumed that they were federal agents. So that's not even news that were in the Capitol. When they were having the congressional testimony, and what is his name? Joe Biden's AG, Merrick Garland, didn't want to answer basic questions about how many agents were there. What were those agents doing? And he didn't want to answer the question. Then they were obviously there. But that's different than a president that has spent the last God knows how many months screaming that he was cheated, he was cheated, he was robbed, he was robbed. He did not care about America. He just wanted Trump land. That is a dangerous precedent. And as I pointed out, Trump should have been put in a cage for that. Not for January 6th, but for trying to overthrow the government itself. Those were two different things. My point is they're trying to set and change and fashion a narrative to make themselves the victims. And this is nonsense. What is this? Prince of Persia. Oh, Prince of Persia. Thank you for that, man. Thank you for that. Welcome to the family. Welcome to the family. What's this next one? Christopher Newton. The official FBI story for how the 1993 World Trade Center bombing was, quote, whoops. We've used the real explosives. Look it up. I will look it up. Look, this is in reference to Tucker Carlson's 9/11 documentary. That documentary is eye-opening. Oh, that documentary is eye-opening. I sat there angry watching it, weirdly enough. The CIA does shit. And I guess that sounds weird. The CIA brings over terrorists because they're trying to use those terrorists to become assets to get information about Al-Qaeda. All right. The CIA doesn't want to tell other agencies what they are doing. So you have effectively Al-Qaeda in the United States learning about planes and all of this other stuff with money coming from the Saudis. So if anything happens, you can effectively blame the Saudis. There's that. They lose track and tells the FBI at the very last minute before they can do anything or before they can even keep track of these people as they're functioning and maneuvering through the United States as a clandestine operation. The CIA was responsible, if not materially, definitely from just gross blunders and belief in their own intelligence and supreme capability of managing people in this way. They wanted assets. Those assets wanted to blow up the towers. Those assets was able to blow up the towers as a direct result of the CIA's intransigence. And so it's mind-blowing. And then the response afterwards was cover it all up. Nobody needs to know about this. Nobody needs to know. Let's blame the Saudis. Let's blame everybody else. Let's create myths around it. Let's do all of that stuff. Nobody needs to know. Let's bury it. And so when they had this 9/11 commission, none of the stuff was in the commission report. All of the stuff was buried in the report. Check out Tucker's documentary. It's eye-opening. It's eye-opening. It's illuminating. And yes, that last tower falling is weird. Agreed. Kevin Wayne, 5 things being missed in the aftermath of the murder of Charlie Kirk by Kevin Wayne. Not a good Christian on Substack. I guess he is plugging his article. Shout out to you, Kevin Wayne. Thank you for the super chat. All right. We've come to the end. We've come to the end. Good show today. Appreciate all of you for being here. You can like the show, share, subscribe. You can support this content through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, Buy Me a Coffee. I think that's all of them. God, I hate saying that. It's necessary for the show, but it is what it is. 70,000, 70K. We're on our way. When did I start back? I started back in November. Yeah, mid to the end of November. And I have been on a tear ever since. I don't think I've taken any days off. Maybe a day off, but that was usually a day from point A to point B. Or I was like ill or something, even when I was ill. Even when I damaged my arm that morning, falling to get a cab. Came my face busted up and everything else. It's like, you never believe my morning. No, it's been a tear, and I gotta be honest, these months have been strange, just in general. Like, you go from a radio job that's entirely secure, and you start doing your channel again. And you, for the most part, get comfortable, especially after like 5 years of doing radio. You're fixed in a certain location in DC. But I will tell you though, like, at a certain point, there was this sense of, what's the word I'm looking for? Pointlessness, if that makes sense. When I started this channel, like, God, what, 10 years ago, give or take, however long that was, the goal was, well, to be honest, the goal was I'm pissed off. But that eventually moderated into, okay, this is my space. And I'll talk about all sorts of issues on this space. And I'll talk about with the audience and everything else. Then after doing the radio position, that gets moderated because it's like, okay, well, there's a better way to do this. You always wanted to do fault lines on your own, just do fault lines on your own. And obviously, you had 2 producers doing fault lines, and so you're effectively doing all the work yourself. But fault lines has never had these numbers, never had the fan interaction or the chat interaction. And despite aspects of this job that are rough, like booking guests, God, I hate booking guests. I hate having to ask people to do anything. But it's just part of the job. You just do it because it's part of the job. And to be consistent over and over, be self-consistent when you're doing it. Whereas the radio thing was comfortable, it wasn't fulfilling. Whereas this is fulfilling, even though it's insecure. It's like a trade-off. It's like, what do you want, comfort or security? Or comfort and security, or excitement, but insecurity and fulfillment. No, it's been a wild ride. We are in what? We're going to be in October pretty soon. Yeah, we're going to be in October pretty soon, so it's about a month away. Let's see. We'll see how far we can go. I mean, my goal is to obviously blow through 100K. We're on the way. So shout out to all of you who have been with me on this ride. I thank you for it. You have my deepest appreciation for joining me and staying with me on this ride as we go through. And the next stop is 80K. Next stop is 80,000. You all have a fantastic day. I want to say like, share, subscribe, be kind to the degree that